Chapter 135. The next day, the little fellow was woken up by the sound of bricks colliding. She opened her eyes in a daze, climbed to the window, and found that a group of strangers were moving bluestones into the yard. She stood in the yard and directed the workers. When Qin Ruoying saw the little fellow get up, she immediately came to her and prepared to help her get up. "Mama, what are they doing?" "The yard is broken. Papa asked someone to repair it. After that, you can play in the yard again. Papa is so nice." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying immediately pinched her little face and asked, "What about Mama?" "Mama is so nice." The little fellow flattered, and Qin Ruoying immediately laughed. After gently picking up the little fellow from the bed, she smiled and said, "Let's go. Mama will take you to wash up." "Okay." To repair the yard, first of all, the broken bluestone slabs had to be swept out, and then the mud from outside to fill the big hole. After that, the bluestone slabs could be laid again. The workers made a lot of noise. Qin Shueching frowned and came out to take a look. Then she slammed the door and went back to the east wing. Recently, she and Qin Yongyan had been completely obsessed with cultivation. They often didn't even go out for a whole day. She didn't ask them to eat now. Anyway, after the family of three had eaten, she would put all the leftovers into the insulated cabinet. When Qin Shueching and Qin Yongyan were hungry, they naturally knew to eat by themselves. After breakfast, she briefly explained to the person in charge of the decoration company that they must finish the work today. After that, the family of three went out. The original owner of the tea house was a very particular person. When he left yesterday, he had carefully cleaned the tea house. After a brief check, she took out a sign from the bar and hung it outside the door. It was open. He didn't even change the sign. He didn't know if there would be any old customers. She sat at the bar and seriously warned the little girl to be sweet and polite, and to take the initiative to greet the guests when they came in. After the little fellow listened to his incessant warning, she nodded her little head numbly. It was unknown whether she understood or not. She had already seen the boss's account book before, and the business was indeed not good. Because it was winter, there was basically no business in the tea house in the morning. It was only slightly better in the afternoon. Many customers who came to the bar because of its reputation would sit in the tea house with their friends for a while, chatting and playing cards before the bar opened. The tea house was open, and even the signboard was still the same. However, she had overlooked a very important issue. That was, opening a tea house required a certain amount of connections. The tea house itself was a business of acquaintances, and the gathering and dispersing of qi were closely related to the boss. A successful tea house must have a boss who could be called a social expert. The customers came for the boss, but they also dispersed because of the boss. Therefore, there was a saying often heard in the tea houses that business was good as long as the boss was there. If the boss was not there, there would be no ghosts. On the right side of the lobby, there was a bookshelf next to the window seat, on which were some of the world's classics that the former boss had bought before. Qin Ruoying casually flipped through, then picked up a book called Love in the Time of Cholera, and sat in the booth to read it. Seeing this, she poured a cup of tea and asked the little fellow to bring it to her. "Nian, come, bring a cup of tea to mommy. Be careful, don't burn yourself." In order to make it convenient for the little fellow to take, she specially chose a hand cup, and only mixed 2/3 of the water. The little fellow held the cup with both hands and walked very slowly. When she carefully came to Qin Ruoying's side, she sweetly shouted, "Mommy, drink tea." Qin Ruoying read carefully, so when the little fellow called her, she found that the little fellow was still holding the teacup, so she quickly took the teacup from the little fellow's hand, and at the same time did not forget to praise, Nian is so good." The little fellow was happy, and seemed to think that it was a very pleasant thing to serve tea to others, so she immediately turned and ran to the bar, looked up at Qin Shi and asked, "Papa, when will the guest come?" Don't worry, take your time. The most important thing to do business is to be patient." Qin Shi smiled and held her in his arms, and then the father and daughter sat behind the bar and chatted. The door opened at 9 o'clock in the morning. After waiting for 2 hours in boredom, the family of 3 finally welcomed their first guest after the opening. To Chen Shi's surprise, the guest did not belong to the middle-aged group, but was a young girl. The girl stood outside the door and hesitated for a moment. After looking at the business sign outside the door, she pushed the door and walked in. She wasn't very old and looked to be about 20 years old. She should be at the age of a down jacket and jeans, but now she was wearing a long coat that did not match her temperament at all, and a combination of pantyhose and boots on the lower half of her body. The girl had put on makeup. Perhaps it was due to her poor technique, but her makeup gave off a strange feeling. Obviously, she was a natural hibiscus, but she had to paint a snake with legs and dress herself up a little. Of course, it would make people feel a little strange. The girl entered the tea house, looked around, and saw that the right side of the booth was already occupied, so she went directly to the left side of the lobby by the window. Seeing this, Chen Shi quickly patted the little fellow, indicating that it was time for her to receive the guest. They opened the shop to train the little fellow's social skills. If the little fellow did not perform well, then it would not be too late for him to come forward. Both parents were here, so the little fellow did not seem to be afraid of strangers. After receiving Chen Shi's signal, she ran over. "Sister, what do you want to drink?" Looking at the 4 or 5-year-old little girl in front of her, Xiao Yuan could not help but be stunned. This tea house was really strange. The waiter was actually an innocent and lovely child. Seeing that she did not speak, the little fellow thought that she did not hear her, so she asked sweetly again, "Sister, what do you want to drink?" "Papa said that we have everything here." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help laughing, and her mood became much better. After glancing at the price list on the table, Xiao Yuan smiled at the little fellow and said, "Then black tea, thank you." "Oh, okay." The little fellow nodded blankly, as if she did not understand what black tea was. But that was not important. What was important was that they had a guest. So, the little fellow immediately turned around and ran back, shouting excitedly as she ran, "Papa! Sister wants black tea. Black tea." The little fellow's voice was very loud and sounded very excited. Even Qin Ruoying was startled by her. "Okay, I got it." Chen Shi smiled and patted the little fellow's head, then took out a packet of Kimun black tea from behind the bar counter. Because she was the first customer after the opening, Chen Shi injected a trace of spiritual energy into the tea when he made it. Xiao Yuan would never have dreamed that she would be able to win the first prize by randomly finding a tea house before going to work. "Sister, drink tea." The little fellow's little mouth was very sweet, and her cute appearance was enough to make people melt, so Xiao Yuan was instantly captivated by her. Xiao Yuan hesitated for a moment, then quickly took out her phone and asked Chen Shi behind the bar counter, "Boss, can I take a photo with your daughter?" Chen Shi nodded and smiled, "As long as she agrees." Seeing that she was so popular, the little fellow was so happy that she could not close her mouth. After taking a photo with Xiao Yuan, the little fellow ran back to Chen Shi's side, a little embarrassed. Then, she burrowed into his arms, rubbing left and right and acting coquettishly. Seeing the little fellow's proud look, Chen Shi could not help but nod in satisfaction. Opening a shop allowed the little fellow to interact with strangers, and also allowed her to gain recognition through her performance. Chapter 136. After Xiao Yuan came, 3 more guests came one after another. They were all middle-aged, and it was obvious that they were regulars in the tea house. The 3 of them joked as they pushed open the door of the tea house, but after entering, they couldn't help but be stunned. One of them looked around the lobby with some doubts. After making sure that he didn't go in the wrong way, he looked at Chen Shi behind the bar and asked, "Where's old Sue?" Hearing this, Chen Shi explained with a smile, "This shop has been transferred. I'm the new owner here. Do you need anything?" "Oh," the man frowned and nodded, then turned to discuss with his companions. After the 3 of them whispered a few words, the one who spoke before said to Chen Shi, 3 cups of plain tea." "Okay, please sit wherever you want." After that, they walked directly to the booth behind Qin Ruoying, as if they were very familiar with this place. After seeing them come over, Chin Roying hesitated for a moment, then took the book back to the bar. After all, she was the lady boss. It was not good to always occupy the best seat. She took out 3 cups from the cabinet. The little girl reached out to take it, but she hurriedly stopped her and said with a smile, "Don't worry, you can't take 3 cups. Daddy will help you." "Oh, okay." The little girl took back her little hand and nodded obediently. After she handed the cup to her, the little girl carefully followed behind she with the cup and walked toward the 3 people. "Oh, boss, is this your daughter?" "Well, yes." "How old is she?" 4.5 years old. Seeing the little girl eagerly following behind the person who spoke just now couldn't help but exclaim, "Your daughter is so cute, she's exactly the same as my little one when she was young." She smiled very politely, then patted the little girl's head and said to her, "Mian Mian, Uncle is praising you. You're cute, quickly say thank you to Uncle." Hearing this, the little girl said sweetly, "Thank you, Uncle." "Oh, your child is so cute." "That's right, why didn't my wife give me a daughter back then?" "Come on, with your shabby appearance, how could you give birth to such a beautiful daughter?" "In my opinion, if your wife had really given birth to such a beautiful daughter for you, I'm afraid you would have taken her for a paternity test long ago." "Bah, you can't spit out ivory from your dog mouth." The 3 of them seemed to have a good relationship with each other. She stood to the side and listened for a while, then said with a smile, "Please sit down. If there's anything you need, just tell me." "Okay, boss, you don't mind us." A Happy's family was always eye-catching. Therefore, Xiao Yuan had been secretly sizing up the family of 3 sitting behind the bar. The boss was handsome, and the lady boss was beautiful and virtuous. They didn't seem to lack money at all, and most importantly, they had a well-behaved and sensible child. Thinking about it, Xiao Yuan couldn't help but have a trace of envy in her eyes. Perhaps she realized that she had lost her composure, but when she saw she look in her direction, Xiao Yuan immediately lowered her head, then picked up the black tea on the table and drank it. The black tea entered her mouth, and the taste was mellow. But when it slowly seeped into her throat, Xiao Yuan faintly felt that there was a delicate fragrance going from her throat to her stomach. The taste was extremely mellow, fragrant, and sweet, which was simply intoxicating. After tasting it carefully, Xiao Yuan felt that her whole person was much more awake, and there was a sudden feeling of enlightenment in front of her. She held the cup in front of her and carefully studied the black tea. "What kind of tea is this? Why is it so delicious? It seems to have the effect of refreshing the mind." Xiao Yuan took another sip, and after tasting it carefully, she suddenly thought of something and quickly looked at the price list on the table. "This cup of tea is so delicious, it must be very expensive, right?" Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had just looked at the price list, and if she remembered correctly, the cost here wasn't very high. However, the taste of this cup of tea made Xiao Yuan suspect that she had just seen wrongly, so she quickly picked up the price list and carefully looked at it. The cheapest was the vegetarian tea, 20 yuan per cup. Biluakun, 28 yuan per cup. Kimun black tea, 38 yuan per cup. And the most expensive Wui de Hong Pao, only 68 yuan per cup. 38 yuan? A cup of caramel macchiato at Starbucks cost more than 30 yuan, and such a mellow black tea only cost 38 yuan? For some reason, Xiao Yuan felt like she had picked up a bargain. If she knew what she was thinking now, he would probably be unable to help but chuckle. The tea leaves of this kind of tea house were usually bought wholesale from the tea market, 1 bag at a time. A bag of 500 grams, and a cup of 20 kilograms. Each cup of tea only required about 3 to 4 grams of tea leaves, and some people had a strong taste, so they put more than 10 grams of tea leaves. On average, 1 bag of tea leaves could make at least 100 cups of tea. Of course, this didn't mean that the tea house was a profiteering industry. After a little careful calculation, one would know that this tea house was definitely a loss-making business. The profits were high, but the corresponding rent, water, and electricity were also very expensive. The rent here was 35,000 yuan, how many cups of tea would it take to earn that much? Moreover, customers could sit here for a whole day after ordering a cup of tea. The tea house was only so big, so even if the business was booming, there was no way to receive more customers after it was full. Xiao Yuan was still savoring the taste of the black tea when her phone suddenly rang. Xiao Yuan quickly picked up the phone, and a man's voice sounded on the other end. Xiao, you're in luck today. The bill is issued before noon. Come quickly, you can still get lunch, and, okay, I'll be right there. After hanging up the phone, Xiao Yuan shouted to Chen Shi, boss, the bill. Hearing this, Chen Shi immediately patted the little girl and said with a smile, Nian, go collect the money, 38 yuan, remember to count it. Oh. The little girl thought for a moment and nodded. Then she jumped down from Qin Ruoying's arms and ran directly to Xiao Yuan. She imitated Chen Shi and said, Sister, 38 yuan. Xiao Yuan took out 2 20s and handed them directly to the little girl when she came over. The little girl took the money and then ran back to the bar. Papa, here. Seeing this, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying couldn't help looking at each other, and both of them laughed. The child didn't know how to add and subtract. It was simply deliberately making things difficult for her to count the money. Sister gave too much money, so we have to give her change. Come on, Nian, give these 2 yuan to sister. The little girl was a little confused. However, after hearing Chen Shi's words, she obediently took the 2 yuan and then ran quickly to Xiao Yuan. At this time, Xiao Yuan had already gotten up and was ready to go out. She seemed to have forgotten that the boss should give her change of 2 yuan. Seeing that she was about to push the door open and leave, the little girl hurriedly shouted, Sister, your money. As she spoke, the little girl waved the money in her hand and ran excitedly to Xiao Yuan's side. Xiao Yuan raised her head and handed the 2 yuan to her. Xiao Yuan stopped and turned to take the 2 yuan in the little girl's hand. She touched her head and said with a smile, Thank you, sister. Can you tell me your name? My name is Chen Nian. Sister, you can call me Nian. After that, the little girl immediately ran back to the bar, seeming a little embarrassed. Goodbye, Nian. I'll come to see you tomorrow. Xiao Yuan smiled and shouted at the little girl's back. The little girl didn't look back, so she looked at the couple behind the bar and politely waved to them before leaving. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled at her in response. Xiao Yuan left. Chapter 137. Lin Xian. Qin Ruoying hadn't seen Lin Xian for many years, so her impression of Lin Xian was still in college. However, Chen Shi's memory of Lin Xian was not long ago. The cruise ship, the dock, the palm trees. On that sunny afternoon, Lin Xian stood under the shade of the tree and watched the father and daughter get into the car and leave. She stood there for a long time. In fact, the Lin Xian of the past was quite similar to the girl just now. A girl from a small county came to Zhonghai, an international first-tier city, to study and work. At that time, Lin Xian had a kind of maturity that was incompatible with her peers. Of course, that so-called maturity, in retrospect, was also a kind of childishness. When all the impurities were washed away, the girl just now might become like Lin Xian now. Chen Shi thought about something thoughtfully. Qin Ruoying glanced at Chen Shi and suddenly asked with a smile, What? Have you met Lin Xian? Hearing this, Chen Shi immediately nodded and replied, Yes, when I first came back, I asked her about you. When Fang Lei got married, she asked Nian to be her flower girl. Fang Lei is married? Thinking about it carefully, I haven't seen them in a long time. Do you think we should go back to Zhonghai to meet them? When do you want to go? Qin Ruoying thought for a moment, looked down at the little girl in her arms, and said, Let's talk about it next spring. The weather is cold, I don't want to go. Okay. Chen Shi nodded, but then he suddenly thought of something and quickly took out his phone. Oh, I almost forgot. Your back is such a big thing, we should tell Auntie Zhang the good news first. While speaking, Chen Shi opened WeChat. After sending a video call request to Auntie Zhang, Chen Shi handed the phone to Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying paused for a moment and quickly took the phone. The video call request rang a few times, then it went through without a beep. Auntie Zhang seemed to be busy with something. The screen showed the ceiling of her house. After she accepted the video call, she probably put the phone on the table. "Yo, stinky brat, you finally remembered to give this old woman a call?" Auntie Zhang's granddaughter was crying. She was so busy comforting her granddaughter that she didn't have time to look at the phone. Qin Ruoying looked at the screen. She didn't see Auntie Zhang, so she hesitated for a moment before saying gently, "Auntie, it's me, Yingying." Auntie was stunned. Then, he grabbed the phone on the table and shouted at the camera with a surprised face, "Oh my God! Yingying! When did you come back?" Seeing that familiar face, Qin Ruoying was also slightly excited. She quickly replied, "I just came back a few days ago. I'm discussing with Chen Shi when to go to Chengdu to visit you." "Thank God, you're finally back. Where are Chen Shi and Ninian?" Come, let me see your family." Hearing Auntie Zhang's request, Qin Ruoying raised the phone high and then asked Chen Shi and the little girl to come over. In the video, Qin Ruoying leaned close to Chen Shi, and Chen Shi held the little girl in his arms. Both of them looked at her with a smile. The little girl poked her head out and saw Auntie Zhang in the video. She immediately shouted excitedly, "Grandma! Grandma!" As she shouted, she waved her little hand and motioned for Auntie Zhang to look at her. "Io, your family is finally reunited." Looking at the family of three in the video, Auntie Zhang's words were also quite emotional. After so many twists and turns, they were finally reunited. Qin Ruoying and Auntie Zhang talked about old times, and Chen Shi held the little girl and listened with a smile. The two of them chatted for more than half an hour. When Auntie Zhang had to prepare lunch for her granddaughter, Qin Ruoying reluctantly said goodbye to her. She had already made an appointment with Auntie Zhang to go to Chengdu during the New Year. Because of the tea house, Chen Shi casually ordered a few dishes at the Chinese restaurant next door for lunch. One for them, and the other for the two cultivation maniacs at home. The business in the afternoon was indeed better. Before 3:00, there were already 4 or 5 tables of customers. Qin Ruoying did the math. The average cost per table was 80 yuan. At least 15 tables of customers were needed to earn back the daily rent. This did not include the artificial water and electricity. Of course, they did not want to make money. Qin Ruoying did the math just for fun. The owner of the tea house was like an immortal couple, the lively and lovely daughter, and the black cat that lay on the bar all day long. In just 3 days, many people knew that the owner of the Qingyi tea house had changed. It was not because Chen Shi was really so eye-catching, but because of the sign hanging at the door. This tea house does not provide chess and card entertainment. This tea house had become a pure tea house. The so-called tea house did not provide chess and card entertainment, but only provided tea and a relatively quiet and relaxing environment. Many people came to the tea house to play cards, so when Chen Shi hung the sign outside that no chess and card entertainment was provided, the business of the tea house went downhill. However, there were gains and losses in everything. The chess and card tea house became a pure tea house. There were fewer individual customers, but more frequent customers. For example, Xiao Yuan. Since the day Xiao Yuan drank the black tea here, she would come to the tea house at 11:00 every morning. Then she would order a cup of black tea and quietly sit on the sofa to read the book she brought. When she did not receive a call, Xiao Yuan would sit in the tea house all day and would not leave until 6:00 in the evening. Every day was like this, so in just a few days, she was very familiar with Ninian. Chen Shi found out from chatting with her that Xiao Yuan was a junior at Beijing Normal University. The reason she came here every day was that she recently found a part-time job in Hohai. Her part-time job seemed a bit strange. After 3 days, she only went to work on the first day. For the next 2 days, she sat in the tea house all day reading and only left in the afternoon. Although Xiao Yuan did not say what her part-time job was, Chen Shi thought it might be related to the bar. This afternoon, including Xiao Yuan, there were only 3 tables of customers in the tea house. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of tires braking on the street outside, followed by a burst of shouting. A customer was alarmed, so he curiously went out of the tea house to take a look. When he went out, he saw a large group of people standing in front of a bar not far away. It was not the opening hours of the bar, and those people did not look like they were here to drink. Some of them seemed to be here to make trouble. This was Hohai, Suzhou City, under the emperor's feet. It was strange that someone dared to make trouble here in broad daylight. The customer looked around and then asked his friends to come out and take a look. Qin Ruoying saw this and followed him out. Xiao Yuan sat by the window, so she wanted to see the situation outside through the window. But at this moment, her phone suddenly rang, giving her a fright. Xiao Yuan answered the phone. After listening to a few words, her face changed greatly. She quickly hung up the phone, stood up from her seat, and looked around the tea house at a loss. She ran directly to the bar and then said to Qin Shi with a pleading face, "Boss, can you let me hide here for a while?" Chapter 138. There was an empty space below the bar, which was just enough for one person to hide. When Qin Shi heard what she said, he was instantly amused. So the commotion outside was caused by her? Xiao Yuan gave Qin Shi a good impression of her. She seemed to be like Lin Xian in the past, with poor family conditions, which was why she chose to work part-time in her spare time. Although she deliberately dressed herself up to the nines, she still faintly emitted a reserved and inexperienced aura that belonged to her age. And this was not something that could be covered up by makeup and dressing up. "Then you sit here, I'll go out and take a look at the situation." As he spoke, Qin Shi stood up and gave up his chair. When Xiao Yuan saw this, she immediately squatted behind his chair, trying to use the bar and chair to hide her figure. When the little girl saw her sneaking around, she was instantly delighted. After clapping her hands to signal Qin Shi to put her down, the little girl ran directly in front of Xiao Yuan and said excitedly, "Sister, do you want to play hide and seek? I can play with you." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help but be speechless. After nervously making a shu gesture, she then said softly to the little girl, "Nian Nian, don't talk to me, just pretend you didn't see me." The little girl looked at her blankly, as if she did not understand what she meant. Xiao Yuan thought for a while, then changed her way of saying, "There are bad people coming to catch me, you don't want sister to be caught by bad people, right?" When she heard this, the little girl finally understood. Hence, the little girl immediately shook her little head like a rattle drum, and at the same time, did not forget to say righteously, "Sister, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Shoo. Just pretend you didn't see me." Seeing that Xiao Yuan was trying to explain the situation to the little girl with a conflicted expression, Qin Shi could not help but smile slightly. He stood behind the little girl, gently carried her up, then said to her, "Let sister stay here for a while, Daddy will bring you out to watch the commotion." "Oh, okay." Seeing that Qin Shi had rescued her from the evil clutches of the little fellow, Xiao Yuan immediately let out a sigh of relief. Then, she looked at Qin Shi with a complicated expression and said softly, "Boss, thank you." Hearing this, Qin Shi smiled at her and comforted her, "It's uncomfortable to squat. Sit on the chair. If you're really scared, I suggest you call the police now." After that, Qin Shi carried the little fellow out of the bar. Looking at his back as he left, Xiao Yuan looked down at the phone in her hand thoughtfully. But after a moment of hesitation, she still put the phone in her bag. Then, she hid under the bar counter, trying to hide better. Outside the tea house. When Qin Ruoying saw Qin Shi carrying the little fellow out, she immediately came to his side. Qin Shi turned his head and saw that not far from the street, there were more than 10 or 20 people blocking the door of a bar. This group of people was not old, about 20 years old. They were very arrogant and their mouths were full of obscenities. A young man who looked like the person in charge of the bar was surrounded in the middle and seemed to be trying to discuss something with them. There were more and more people around. Qin Shi listened for a while and got a general idea of the situation. This was a shill bar. The so-called shill bar was that, while operating normally, it would arrange some keyboard players to chat with people on the internet, using dates as bait to lure people to come here to spend money. If it was a normal customer who came to the bar to spend money, then they would think that the bar was not bad and the cost was not high. But if it was a customer who was brought here by a bartender, then their spending here would be more than 10 times higher. Shill bars were not only in the form of bars. Many coffee shops, restaurants, gift shops, and even tea houses might be shill bars. Shill bars had become a complete industry chain, mainly composed of keyboard players, bartenders, and consumption places. Among them, the larger ones might also have a manager. Keyboard players disguised their information as a young and beautiful woman through social media software such as QQ, WeChat, Momo, Tantuan, or dating websites and dating forums, and then seduced some single men or men with bad intentions to come out and meet them. After the keyboard players chatted with the fat sheep online to a certain extent, the bartenders would come out to meet the customers. They did not need to be too beautiful, just with good facial features. In fact, they also used the dirty thoughts of some men. The meeting place was generally near the shill bar. The bartenders themselves were different from what the fat sheep saw on the internet. Most of the fat sheep would not doubt it, because most of them would be dazzled by this sudden encounter. After the meeting, the bartenders would first accompany the fat sheep for a walk, and then take the opportunity to say that they were tired and wanted to sit in the shill bar. Of course, the fat sheep would not refuse. Instead, he looked forward to the bartenders getting drunk. If the fat sheep had not been dazzled by the encounter, he would look at the price list before the bartenders ordered. The items in the shill bar were all priced clearly. If the fat sheep thought it was expensive, he could leave at any time. But if the fat sheep did not even look at the price list and directly wanted to pretend to be rich in front of the bartenders, then it would be embarrassing. 2 drinks and a fruit plate of 388 yuan. This was only the first step, and the price would be lighter. If the fat sheep agreed to let the bartenders order wine, it would be upgraded to the second step. A red wine that cost more than 10 yuan would be sold here for 1,888 yuan and 3,888 yuan. A black-hearted person could even ask for 8,888 yuan directly. If the fat sheep refused to pay, then sorry, the shill bar's hatchet man would come out. It was not a real fight, but a threat. If he did not pay, he would not leave. A smarter fat sheep would ask to share with the bartenders, only give half of the money, and then call the police afterwards. However, it was a pity that the industry itself was in a gray area. As long as the boss of the shill bar was smart, even if the fat sheep called the police afterwards, the boss only needed to refund the money, because they did not break the law. There was a price list on each table. The price was clearly marked, and it was voluntary. Xiao Yuan was obviously a bartender's. But what was strange was that the fat sheep were generally spendthrifts who did not have much social experience. This group of young people who blocked the door of the bar and made trouble were not good people at first glance. To put it bluntly, they were not cut out to be fat sheep. What the hell was going on here? Chen Shi held the little fellow outside the tea house and watched the bustle. At this time, someone said, "She's in the tea house over there." After the group of people heard this sentence, they immediately rushed in the direction of Chen Shi. Several guests in the tea house were still happily watching the bustle, but when they saw the group of people suddenly coming over, they quickly hid to the side. There was a street outside the tea house, and across the street was Ho Hai. Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying stood side by side at the entrance of the tea house. After the group of young people came over, they surrounded them. The little fellow was obviously frightened by their formation, so he immediately shrank back into Chen Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chen Shi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying, and then motioned her to take the child in first. Chapter 139. Chen Shi calmly looked at the group of young people in front of him. Among the group of young people, the youngest was about 20 years old, and the oldest was no more than 25 years old. They were all dressed very fashionably, and a few of them were very handsome. However, they did not stand properly, and the moment they opened their mouths were full of obscenities, inadvertently giving people a frivolous and vulgar feeling. The leader was about 24 or 25 years old. After his companions surrounded the door of the tea house, he stood in front of Chen Shi with a cigarette in his mouth. As if he wanted to create momentum for himself, the young man didn't hold back and directly blew a smoke ring at Chen Shi. However, he didn't expect the wind to be very strong today. So just as he blew out the smoke ring, a sudden gust of wind blew the smoke ring directly into his face. Choked by the smoke, the young man immediately lowered his head and couldn't help but rub his eyes. As a result, the imposing manner that he had deliberately created was destroyed and completely disappeared. This young man was called Wang Hao, and he was also a famous person in Shangjing's nightclub circle. Whenever it was night time, it was time for Wang Hao to shuttle through the major bars. Recently, Huaxia suddenly set off a hip-hop craze, just like the rock craze of the 80s and 90s, which suddenly became popular all over the country. Wang Hao was one of the first underground rappers. After catching up with the hip-hop craze, he was also in the limelight in Shangjing. Most of the bars in Hohai were small bars, so Wang Hao wasn't familiar with this area. The reason why he brought people here today was because one of his brothers was cheated of money by a bartender. His brother was related to him and just came out from his hometown to mingle with him. Before, he was a very honest person and didn't see much of the world, so he didn't understand the twists and turns of the bar. After chatting with the keyboard player online for a while, the brother suddenly became hot-headed and wanted to ask the girl to come out and meet. Coincidentally, the bartender that the boss arranged for him was Qiao Yuan. In terms of appearance, Qiao Yuan's appearance was definitely the best among the group of bartenders. As a young man who had just come to Shangjing, when had he ever been in close contact with a beauty of this level? Therefore, he was mesmerized by Qiao Yuan at that time. Qiao Yuan didn't say much to him before he excitedly ordered some wine. The more he drank, the more confused he became. In the end, he directly opened a big order of 20,000 yuan. 20,000 yuan, 20% for the keyboard, 40% for the bartender, and another 40% for the boss. After the order was confirmed, Qiao Yuan would get 8,000 yuan. Usually, the bill would only be settled once every half a month or a month. That was because if the customer called the police, the bill would be refunded. Therefore, the money had not yet reached Qiao Yuan's hands. It was rare to see someone like Wang Hao who didn't call the police and instead brought his own people to cause trouble. Everyone was in the same business. Wang Hao was in the right now, so the boss decisively refunded the 20,000 yuan to him. But what was strange was that Wang Hao was not satisfied with the money he got back. He actually asked the boss to hand over Qiao Yuan. This request was too much. The boss couldn't agree, so he tried to negotiate with them. However, while the boss was negotiating with Wang Hao, a girl who was usually jealous of Qiao Yuan secretly betrayed Qiao Yuan. Therefore, Wang Hao brought people directly to the tea house. The girl who betrayed them was very clever and didn't expose herself. The boss also didn't know who betrayed them. When he saw Wang Hao rushing to the tea house with his men, the owner was a little anxious and hurriedly made a call for help. Refund was a reasonable request, but taking people away was absolutely not. Otherwise, how could he continue to mingle on this street? Unfortunately, it was only 3 in the afternoon, so the thugs were still sleeping at home. After the boss vented his anger on the phone, he looked at the tea house not far away with worry. Most of the people who could open a shop in Hohai weren't easy to deal with. A strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts. Therefore, after Wang Hao fiercely threw the cigarette butt on the ground, he casually said to Chen Shi, "Are you the boss of this shop?" "Yes." "This has nothing to do with you. Just hand over that Xiao and we'll leave immediately. We won't hinder your business." After saying that, Wang Hao squinted his eyes and quietly looked at Chen Shi. If people who play rock have a wanton temperament, then people who play hip-hop are obviously their upgraded version. They always act like they are the boss and don't even put Mother Earth in their eyes. However, Chen Shi's answer was somewhat out of his expectations. He saw Chen Shi suddenly smiled and casually replied, "Qiao." "I don't know, there's no such person here." F***ck, are you trying to scare us? Brother How, don't talk nonsense with him. Let's go in and search, don't let that girl run away. Yes, go in and search. Wang Hao didn't speak, he just looked up and down at Qin Shi. However, the group of young people behind him suddenly couldn't sit still. Qin Shi slowly glanced at the people in front of him, his expression didn't change. He stood quietly at the door of the tea house, as if he didn't intend to let Wang Hao and the others in. But at this moment, a young man who was originally standing at the back of the crowd suddenly moved. He suddenly turned around, picked up a fist-sized stone from the ground, and then directly smashed it toward the tea house's glass. Bang! The expected sound of glass breaking did not ring out. The glass seemed to be tempered glass, and the stone only made a loud collision sound when it hit it. The stone fell to the ground, but the glass didn't move. The young man was not convinced. After fiercely staring at Qin Shi, he picked up the stone from the ground again. But this time, he didn't smash the stone out. Instead, he stood directly in front of the glass window with the stone. Bang! 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 The young man held the stone and smashed the glass with all his strength. Qin Ruoying sat on the chair next to Qiao Yuan with the little girl in her arms. The little girl shrank in Qin Ruoying's arms. This movement not only scared the little girl, but also the guests in the tea house. Seeing that the young man kept smashing the glass with the stone, the guests retreated to the corner. This group of young people was simply lawless. The young man smashed the stone for a while, but there was still no trace of damage on the glass. At this moment, Qin Shi spoke. That's tempered glass. Be careful, don't hurt your own hand and come back to me later to pay for the medical expenses. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man picked up the stone and smashed it again as if he didn't hear him at all. Bang! The loud collision sounded again. Immediately after, the young man suddenly let out a wail that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. Everyone hurriedly turned to look, only to see him covering his right hand with his left hand and constantly shouting. Blood dripped down from his fingers. It seemed that Qin Shi was right. Chapter 140. Smashing the glass and injuring his own hand? This sudden turn of events shocked everyone present. It seems to be quite serious. Quickly take him to the doctor to stop the bleeding. Turn left on this street, there is a small clinic less than 200 meters away. Seeing that the young man's hand was bleeding profusely, Qin Shi reminded Wang Hao with a smile. After hearing Qin Shi's words, Wang Hao seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He hurriedly asked someone to take the injured person to the clinic to stop the bleeding. After the injured person left, the group of young people in front of him could not help but look at each other. They wanted to smash someone else's glass as a demonstration, but they did not expect to injure their own hand instead of breaking the glass. This was truly a great loss of face. Wang Hao coughed a little awkwardly. But immediately after, he said to Qin Shi with some annoyance, "Boss, I didn't bring so many brothers here today to stand here in the cold wind. You opened the door to do business, so you should know that it's better to avoid trouble. How about you let the girl come out, and we'll part on good terms?" Qin Shi did not respond. Instead, he smiled and shook his head. "CNM. Do you believe that we'll smash your broken tea house?" It was unknown who had suddenly said such a sentence. Hearing this, Qin Shi thought for a moment, then asked with some doubt, "Didn't we smash it just now?" As soon as these words came out, it was like a spark falling into a pile of gunpowder. The group of young people in front of him was instantly ignited by him. A few of the hot-tempered ones were about to rush up on the spot. Looking at their aggressive postures, it seemed like they were about to make a move. However, before Qin Shi could react, Wang Hao had already opened his arms and stopped them. Wang Hao was not stupid, and he was already past the age of fighting for personal feelings. Although he usually acted extremely arrogantly, in reality, he was very measured in his actions. This was not a small county, but the capital of Huaxia, Shangjing. The water in Shangjing was very deep. If you casually threw a brick on the street, it could hit a big shot that they absolutely could not afford to offend. Wang Hao had come from a small county and had finally made a name for himself. So how could he do something as stupid as taking the lead to cause trouble? Even if they wanted to make a scene, they would only do so after he left. Just like wine stalls, every industry had its own rules of survival. Throwing stones and smashing glass was actually not a problem at all. Even if they rushed in and smashed things up, they would only need to pay some money in the end. Article 275 of the criminal law clearly stipulates that, in cases of intentional destruction of property, if the loss of public or private property exceeds 5,000 renminbi, the case shall be filed for prosecution. In other words, as long as the loss did not exceed 5,000 yuan, the police would not file a case. These days, hooligans were not scary. What was scary was that hooligans were cultured. Therefore, it was fine to smash the shop, but not to beat people up. Now that there were so many people watching, if this person were to lie on the ground and insist that there was something wrong with his brain, then they would obviously have to spend a short holiday in the police station. However, Wang Hao's patience had been worn out by Chen Shi. After signaling them not to make a move, Wang Hao spat on the ground and said fiercely, "Go in and find him." After saying that, Wang Hao stared coldly at Chen Shi, as if warning Chen Shi not to blindly interfere. Following his order, the young people behind Wang Hao swarmed toward the door of the tea house. However, they were wrong. They did not make a move, but that did not mean that Chen Shi would not make a move. Chen Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with them. If anyone dared to approach the door, he would kick them. Being a bartender was not a glorious profession. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Chen Shi wanted Xiao Yuan to go out and give them an explanation. After all, it was Xiao Yuan who was wrong first. But unfortunately, this group of young people were very stubborn. Under their superficial skin was an infinitely inflated heart. The group of people wanted to hang a sign on their faces as they walked, saying, "I am the most awesome, I am the best in the world." Their aggressive appearance also scared Ninian. Therefore, the side that was supposed to be in the right was particularly hateful in Chen Shi's eyes. The two young people who rushed at the front thought that Chen Shi did not dare to stop them, so they did not even look at Chen Shi and rushed toward the door. However, just as they were about to touch the door of the tea house, Chen Shi suddenly kicked them back. Chen Shi had a sense of propriety. He did not hurt them, but made it impossible for them to get close to the door. Looking at the two brothers who were kicked back by Chen Shi, Wang Hao suddenly flew into a rage. "TMD. You dare to make a move? Beat them to death." Since the other party had made a move, how could he tolerate it? Therefore, he led the charge. At this moment, the door behind Chen Shi suddenly opened. "Stop!" With a shout, Xiao Yuan hurriedly ran in front of Chen Shi, and then directly blocked him behind her. Xiao Yuan glanced at Wang Hao with slight fear in her eyes. After hesitating for a moment, she pretended to be calm and said, "This has nothing to do with Boss Chen. I am Xiao Qiao. If you have any problems, come at me." Xiao Yuan had been paying attention to the movement outside the door. When she heard that they were about to make a move, she could not help but rush out. Although Xiao Yuan did not understand why these people were looking for her, there was no doubt that this was caused by her, so she could not implicate others. Wang Hao stopped and looked at Xiao Yuan. He could not help but show a strange expression on his face. Xiao Yuan was not stupid. When she realized that the other party had brought a lot of people, she decisively called the police. Therefore, standing in front of Wang Hao, Xiao Yuan had some confidence. She held the phone and shook it in a circle. Then, Xiao Yuan continued to say to Wang Hao, "I'm warning you not to mess around. I just called the police. The police will be here soon." Hearing this, Wang Hao could not help but laugh. He casually mocked, "Call the police? What? What law did we break? B*TCH, let me tell you. It was a small matter, but now you've made a big deal out of it. Just you wait." After he finished speaking, he pointed at Xiao Yuan fiercely. Xiao Yuan was frightened by him. She could not help but take a small step back. But what was strange was that Wang Hao did not do anything. Instead, he brought his people directly to the opposite side of the street. Then, they stood in a row against the railing. Qiao Yuan was a little confused. She could not help but turn to look at Chen Shi and ask, "What happened to them? Did you call the police?" I called the police." "Then let's wait for the police to come." After he finished speaking, Chen Shi turned and returned to the tea house. Qiao Yuan looked back at Wang Hao and his people with some doubts. She realized that he was still staring at her fiercely, so she followed Chen Shi into the tea house in fear. Gangsters had a characteristic, which was that they bullied the weak and feared the strong. So when they heard that the police were coming, they immediately became obedient. But so what if the police came? Were they going to take them all back to the police station? In Wang Hao's words, that was. Chapter 141. After hearing that Qiao Yuan had called the police, Wang Hao and his men dispersed. Gathering a crowd to make trouble? No, they just came to Hohai to see the scenery. Qiao Yuan was still a little confused, but seeing that Wang Hao and his men hadn't left, she didn't dare to run around and could only obediently follow Chen Shi back to the tea house. After Chen Shi returned to the tea house, the guests at the two tables gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Boss, you're amazing, you're a real man," not to mention who was right and who was wrong. Just Chen Shi blocking the entrance of the tea house by himself was enough to make them applaud and praise him. This boss was very competent. Qin Ruoying whispered to the little girl at the bar, making her giggle from time to time. After seeing that Chen Shi had returned, the little girl immediately rubbed against Qin Ruoying's arms and reached out for Chen Shi to carry her. After Chen Shi picked her up from Qin Ruoying's arms, the little girl asked sweetly, "Papa, what were you doing outside?" Papa was reasoning with them. "Why? Did they scare you?" Hearing this, the little girl immediately shook her head and pouted, "No, I don't like them." Children were sometimes very strange, and the first impression a stranger left on them was very important. If this person was someone they liked, then they would immediately be very kind to this person, as if they were familiar with him. But if this person wasn't someone they liked, then sorry, the child would stay as far away as possible. Unless their parents were around, they wouldn't get too close. The group of people outside was obviously not the little girl's favorite. Chen Shi touched the little girl's little face and said with a smile, "This is our home. If you don't like them, then Papa won't let them in, okay?" "Okay." The little girl happily acted coquettishly. At this time, Qiao Yuan slowly walked over. After hesitating for a moment, she said very embarrassedly, "Boss, I'm sorry for the trouble." After saying that, Qiao Yuan suddenly bowed to Chen Shi. Before Chen Shi could say anything, Qin Ruoying waved at her and smiled. "It's nothing. Why don't you come over and have a chat?" Hearing the lady boss's words, Qiao Yuan obediently sat beside her. "How long have you been in this business?" "Half a month. How much did you earn?" Qiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. Then, she said hesitantly, "If this order is included, it should be more than 20,000 yuan. However, the bill hasn't been paid yet. Why do you want to do this?" "If I remember correctly, you are a student of Beijing Normal University, right?" Qin Bei is from Beijing Normal University, and Beijing Normal University is known as one of the 4 famous universities in Beijing. It can even be ranked in the top 20 in the country. Do you think it's appropriate for a student from Beijing Normal University to be a prostitute? Qin Ruoying's voice was very soft and gentle, but every word pierced Qiao Yuan's heart. Qiao Yuan lowered her head in silence. After a long while, her tears flowed down silently. Seeing that his wife was about to talk about life ideals with others, Chen Shi held the little fellow and sat in the center of the lobby, leaving some private space for them. Qiao Yuan sobbed in a low voice. Qin Ruoying waited for a moment, then took out a few tissues and handed them to her. "Can you tell me why?" Qiao Yuan took the tissues and wiped her tears. After taking a deep breath, she looked at Qin Ruoying and said sadly, "My father is sick. He needs money. I've done a lot of work, but I can't make any money. Someone recommended me to work in a KTV. I was afraid, so I didn't go. But I really need money, so they recommended me to be a prostitute. Xiao Yuan's family was very ordinary. Her father was a middle school teacher, and her mother was an elementary school teacher. Their income was not high. They relied on her father's tuition classes to earn some extra money. Their family barely reached the standard of a well-off family. She was a very happy girl. Although her family was not rich, she did not have to worry about food and clothing. Her family was happy. She could be regarded as a pretty girl in a small family. Xiao Yuan also worked hard. She was the top liberal arts scholar in her county during the college entrance examination. However, sometimes the reality was more cliché than stories. After all, life was like an electrocardiogram. If it was smooth sailing, it meant that you were dead. 3 years ago, Xiao Yuan's father was diagnosed with chronic uremia. So there were only 2 paths left in front of them: lifelong dialysis or kidney transplant. The price of dialysis was not too expensive. The charge was slightly different in each place. The price of a single dialysis was about 400 yuan. A patient had to undergo dialysis at least 3 or 4 times a week, about 13 times a month. It cost 5,200 yuan, about 60,000 yuan a year. 60,000 yuan didn't sound like much. However, for an ordinary family in a small county, this was already a huge expense. Because of his health, Xiao Yuan's father was forced to close the tuition classes. However, he did not quit. Instead, he insisted on going to work every day. Xiao Yuan's father often said, Xiao, don't worry about family matters. Just study hard. When you graduate and find a good job, Dad can enjoy life. This illness was not life-threatening for a while, but it would put a lot of financial pressure on a family. So every time Xiao Yuan returned home, she would feel that her parents had aged a lot. It was also because of this that Xiao Yuan worked part-time while studying hard to earn scholarships since her freshman year. She had done many jobs, such as waitress, tutor, courier, and part-time model. Part-time model was the fastest way to earn money, but this kind of good thing was not common. In fact, she had the qualifications to become a contract model, but Xiao Yuan did not forget that she was still a student. So, she decisively refused. She wanted to give her father a kidney transplant, but it was a sky-high price. The kidney source started at 200,000 yuan, and the surgery cost 50,000 to 60,000 yuan. After the kidney transplant was successful, he would need to take anti-rejection drugs, which cost about 10,000 yuan a month. After half a year, she would have to pray that there would be no infection or rejection. Otherwise, the condition might worsen. Moreover, a kidney source was not easy to find. Although a kidney transplant might not be able to cure him, compared to lifelong dialysis, a kidney transplant was indeed the most ideal treatment. So, Xiao Yuan only wanted to save 300,000 yuan as soon as possible, in case a suitable kidney source appeared in the future and she did not have the money to give her father a kidney transplant. Xiao Yuan was very thrifty. Even the clothes she was wearing were borrowed from her best friend. There were 38 cups of black tea in Chen Shi's tea house. If it were not for the fact that the bar saleswoman had to wait near the bar at all times, and sometimes she would wait for a whole day, she would not come in and sit down for a cup of tea. Being a bar saleswoman was indeed very profitable. In addition, she had some beauty. So, Xiao Yuan had successfully slaughtered a few fat sheep in just half a month. The money came so easily, but it also made Xiao Yuan feel a sense of guilt. So, she saved these people's phone numbers. She had already decided that when her father recovered from his illness, she would return the money to these people one by one and sincerely say, "Thank you." She really could not think of any other way, so, sorry. Qin Ruoying was a very qualified listener. She sat there and quietly listened to Xiao Yuan's story. After Xiao Yuan finished her story, Xiao Yuan could no longer hold it in. She suddenly lay on the bar counter and burst into tears. Perhaps she had been suppressed for too long, so the girl cried very sadly. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying gently put the tissue next to Qiao Yuan. Then, she looked at Chen Shi thoughtfully. Chen Shi saw this and nodded gently at her. With his 5 senses, he could easily determine whether the girl was lying or not. When Qiao Yuan was talking just now, Chen Shi was listening quietly by the side. So he was very sure that the girl was not lying. Chapter 142. After listening to Qiao Yuan's story for a few minutes, there was a burst of sirens on the street outside. The Ministry of Public Security's 110 Police Service Standardization Standards clearly stated that police personnel must respond quickly after receiving a police order. Any major threat to the personal and property safety of citizens, emergency call for help. In the city, they must arrive at the scene within 5 minutes. In the suburbs, they must arrive at the scene within 10 minutes. This was a hard indicator, so don't make a false police report. Otherwise, you will be invited to drink tea for a few hours. Seeing that the police came, Chen Shi handed the little guy to Qin Ruoying, and he walked out with Qiao Yuan. The police car stopped in front of the tea house. The driver was a middle-aged policeman, and the policeman in the passenger seat was younger, about the same age as Wang Hao. At first glance, it was the standard of a civilian police and an auxiliary police. The middle-aged policeman was not polite. After glancing at Wang Hao and his group, he directly asked Chen Shi, "Did you call the police?" Chen Shi nodded. When he was about to explain the situation to the policeman, the middle-aged policeman pointed at Wang Hao and his group and asked, "Is it them?" Hearing this, Qiao Yuan suddenly acted like a class monitor reporting to the teacher. She quickly interrupted and said, "It's them. They just blocked the entrance of the tea house and caused trouble. They even smashed the window." "Did they do anything? Did they suffer any losses?" Qiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. After glancing at the untouched window, she said with some difficulty, "They didn't do anything. It seems that there are no losses." "Okay, I got it." The middle-aged policeman nodded, then turned and walked directly across the street. This was a bar street, so there were often some drunk people causing trouble here. As a policeman in the area, he had seen too many, so he was not surprised by these situations. "Who's the leader?" As soon as the middle-aged policeman's voice fell, Wang Hao immediately replied with a smile, "There's no leader. Just a few friends gathering here, chatting and looking at the scenery of Hohai. Don't give me that. Hurry up and leave. Do what you need to do." The middle-aged policeman glared at him and waved his hand to let them leave. Seeing this, Wang Hao said with some dissatisfaction, "Hey, officer, we didn't break the law, right? This is not Zongnanhai. Are we not allowed to hang out here?" "That's right. Isn't this bar street? We still have to wait for the night to drink," one of the lackeys casually added. But when he spoke, his eyes were looking at Hohai, as if he didn't dare to look at the middle-aged policeman. The middle-aged policeman was also a veteran. He naturally knew how to deal with this group of punks, so he immediately said to Wang Hao, "Take out your ID card." Wang Hao didn't seem to hear him clearly. The middle-aged policeman glanced at him, then suddenly saluted him. Then, he took out his ID and said seriously, "There have been many robberies around here. In order to ensure the safety of the people, I have the right to interrogate you. Please cooperate with the investigation. Otherwise, I have the right to forcibly summon you. If you have any objections, you can call 110 or 12,389 to complain. This is my police number, please show me your ID card." Wang Hao was terrified when he saw that the middle-aged policeman seemed to have changed into a different person in an instant. Therefore, he quickly squeezed out a smile and saluted to the policeman. Then, he said with a cheeky smile, "Understood, right away, we'll leave right away." After that, he called his brothers and left. The middle-aged policeman saw that he was tactful, so he was satisfied and took back his ID. As a basic policeman, he was also considered to be a very responsible kind, so he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he was going to wait until Wang Hao and his group left. Under the gaze of the middle-aged policeman, Wang Hao had to reluctantly take his group to their car. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. So, before he left, he didn't forget to give Chen-shi a middle finger, and then slowly made a gesture of slitting his neck. Looking at his posture, he seemed to be silently telling Chen-shi that this matter wasn't over yet. The characteristics of hooligans, besides bullying the weak and fearing the strong, were also disgusting. If a business offended them, they wouldn't hurt them, but they would endlessly harass them, making it impossible for them to do business. Xiao Yuan also understood what Wang Hao wanted to express, so she quickly said to Chen-shi, "Boss, I'm sorry. I'll go and explain it to them." After that, she wanted to chase after Wang Hao and his group. This matter had to be resolved. Why not take advantage of the fact that the police were still here and have a good talk with Wang Hao? At most, she would just have to pay for it. However, Xiao Yuan had just taken 2 steps when Chen-shi suddenly pulled her back, then shook his head at her, indicating that she shouldn't go. It had to be said that Xiao Yuan really thought of this matter too simply. Wang Hao was obviously coming for her. Although she didn't know what they wanted to do, it was obviously not for money. There must be another purpose. Seeing that Xiao Yuan was still confused, Chen-shi sighed softly, "Don't go. I think they're not doing it for money, but for you as a person, me as a person." "What do you mean?" "Boss, I don't understand." However, Chen-shi shook his head and didn't explain further. Seeing this, Xiao Yuan could only stand beside Chen-shi obediently. The boss had just saved her, so he shouldn't be a bad person. Listening to him should be the right thing to do. Wang Hao and his group drove 4 cars. They weren't luxury cars, but after the cars started, there was a rumbling sound. Obviously, they were modified cars, and the throttle was changed and the turbine was installed, so when the accelerator was stepped on, there was a deafening roar. As if to demonstrate, when Wang Hao drove past the door of the tea house, he deliberately stepped on the accelerator, making the noise even louder. Xiao Yuan couldn't help but cover her ears. The middle-aged policeman stood silently by the side, looking at Wang Hao and his group with a blank face. He was a policeman, not a traffic policeman, so he couldn't do anything about this kind of thing. Otherwise, he would have detained these bastards' cars. Wang Hao rolled down the window, spitting out a mouthful of saliva, then opened his mouth and silently said, "F***CKU." Then, he gave Chen-shi the middle finger again. Changing gears, braking, and stepping on the accelerator. After a set of smooth operations, Wang Hao laughed wildly and sped up. The 4 modified cars roared and sped away in an instant. The middle-aged policeman shook his head, as if he was lamenting the degeneration of the world. However, at this moment, Chen-shi suddenly waved his arm. Then, Wang Hao's car slammed into the railing of Ho-Hai. Bang! In order to send them on their way, Chen-shi even broke the railing. Therefore, when Wang Hao's car hit the railing immediately broke, and his car flew into Ho-Hai. The skating rink in Ho-Hai usually opened in January. Although some places were already frozen, it wasn't very thick. The car fell into the water, causing a huge splash. The middle-aged policeman was stunned by the scene in front of him. It wasn't until the car slowly sank into the water that he suddenly came back to his senses, and quickly called the auxiliary police to help him save people. It was just a small punishment and a big warning, not really taking their lives. Therefore, in order to prevent any accidents, Chen-shi had already considerately opened the car door for Wang Hao while he was still in the air. Chapter 143. This year was not a warm winter, but a cold winter. So in December, the water surface of Ho-Hai had already condensed a thin layer of ice. Wang Hao's car was filled with 5 people. After the car drove into the water, the 5 people struggled to swim back to the shore. The other people on the shore hurriedly pulled them up. Looking at the people who were squeezing into the car, the middle-aged policeman couldn't help but sigh, "Karma." Although tourists accidentally fell into Ho-Hai from time to time, the middle-aged policeman had been in this area for so long, and he really hadn't heard of anyone who could drive a car into Ho-Hai. The car was probably scrapped, and how to get it out had become a big problem. It was estimated that the Shikahai subdistrict community would seek compensation from them. This group of stinky brats was also unlucky. But this was no longer the middle-aged policeman's business, so he called the young policeman and prepared to leave. "Comrade, take care." After Chen-shi smiled and said hello to the middle-aged policeman, he took Xiao Yuan back to the tea house. As soon as they walked into the tea house, Qin Ruoying glanced at Chen-shi with a smile. She knew what happened outside, so she guessed that this must be Chen-shi's good deed. Young people don't know the immensity of heaven and earth, a little punishment is okay. After being disturbed by this group of bastards, the guests at the table who just left didn't even pay the bill. Now they didn't know where they went. After the couple cleaned up the teacups at their table, they returned to the bar with the little girl in their arms. Xiao Yuan stood in the lobby stupidly and looked at their calm appearance. For a while, she didn't know what to say. After a long time, Xiao Yuan came to the bar, bowed to the couple, and said sincerely, "Boss, lady boss, thank you." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying said with a smile, "Give you a piece of advice, don't do this in the future. This is not a glorious career. With your education, you should be able to find a very good job in the future. I hope you can distinguish the priorities and don't ruin your future." After hearing her words, Xiao Yuan fell silent. After hesitating for a while, she nodded lightly and said in a low voice with a complicated expression, "I understand." "Thank you, lady boss." Qin Ruoying smiled and turned to look at Chen-shi. Chen-shi looked at his wife helplessly. Then, he grabbed a black pill from the plate of sunflower seeds in front of the big cat. The big cat was lying lazily on the bar counter. When it saw that one of its snacks was taken away, it immediately stuck its head out and let out a dissatisfied meow. Chen-shi stroked its head, then smiled at Xiao Yuan and said, "This is a pill left behind by an old Chinese doctor. I heard that it's especially helpful for kidney diseases. You can take this pill back to your father and see if it has any effect. Don't worry, it's a pure Chinese medicine formula. Even if it doesn't have any effect, there definitely won't be any side effects." Xiao Yuan took the pill skeptically. After glancing at it, she wrapped the pill in a tissue and said to Chen-shi solemnly, "Thank you, boss. Go, come, Nian Nian, say goodbye to your sister." "Goodbye, sister." Hearing this, the little girl immediately stood on Chen-shi's lap and stuck her head out from behind the bar counter. She smiled and waved goodbye to Xiao Yuan. "Goodbye, Nian Nian, sister will come to see you later." Xiao Yuan turned and left with a complicated expression. After leaving the tea house, she couldn't help but look back at the signboard with the words, "Qingyi Tea House," written on it. Then, as if she had finally made up her mind, she quickly walked towards the bar. The weather wasn't very good today. It was always gray. Although it wasn't hazy yet, there wasn't even a bit of sunlight in the cold weather. There was no way to cheer people up. After the little episode just now, it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. Perhaps she had been infected by the big cat. The little girl sat on Chen-shi's lap and lazily put her chin on the bar counter. She constantly blew with her small mouth, trying to blow a tissue into the air. Chen-shi wanted to take her out for a walk, but the little girl pouted and shook her head. It looked like she didn't want to move at all. The TV in the tea house didn't have a broadcasting function, so she couldn't order cartoons. Since she couldn't watch cartoons, she wanted to serve tea to the customers. There weren't many customers, so the little girl was bored to death. Qin Ruoying saw this and smiled gently. "Nian Nian, mommy will tell you a story, okay?" Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Mommy's stories were better than daddy's stories. So she immediately climbed from Chen-shi's lap to Qin Ruoying's lap. Then she shook Qin Ruoying's arm and smiled. "Mommy, tell me." "Okay, sit down first. Mommy will tell you a story." Once upon a time, there was a temple on the mountain. Qin Ruoying told the little girl the story of the 3 monks. But before the story was half finished, the door of the tea house was suddenly pushed open. Seeing this, Chen-shi interrupted Qin Ruoying's story and said directly to the little girl, "Nian Nian, look, there are guests." "Guests?" After a few days of getting used to it, the little girl had become familiar with the reception work of the tea house. So when she heard that there were guests, she was so excited that she wanted to jump out of Chin Ruoying's arms. Chin Ruoying was afraid that she would jump and fall, so she had to put her down carefully. The little girl seemed to be very enthusiastic about greeting guests. So when she stepped on the ground, she ran out from behind the bar counter. However, when the little girl ran out of the bar counter and saw the guests, she couldn't help but be stunned. Immediately after, she ran back to the bar counter and hid. Seeing this, Chin-shi picked her up and carried her out of the bar counter. "Hello, please take a seat." The person who came was an old man. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had two children who were about the same age as Nyan. The two children looked exactly the same, and they were dressed exactly the same. They looked like they were carved out of the same mold, twins. It was the first time that other children had appeared in the tea house, and they were a pair. The little girl had never seen twins before, so she was scared and ran back. After hearing Chen-shi's words, the old man took the twins and sat in the seat where Qiao Yuan had sat before. After carrying the little girl to the old man's side, Chen-shi asked with a smile, "What would you like to drink, sir?" The old man didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the little girl in Chen-shi's arms with interest. The little girl seemed to be a little shy. She lay on Chen-shi's shoulder and didn't dare to turn her head. "This is your daughter?" Yes." "How old is she?" 4.5 years old. Hearing this, the old man couldn't help but laugh. Then he pointed at the twins who were squeezed on the sofa and said, "What a coincidence, these two children are also 4.5 years old." It is a bit of a coincidence. As he spoke, Chen-shi put the little girl on the ground. Then he held her hand and said to her, "Nyan, come and say hello to Grandpa." The little girl hesitated for a moment. Then, with Chen-shi's encouragement, she said very politely to the old man, "Hello, Grandpa." Chapter 144. Twins. According to statistics, the average birth rate of twins in the world was 89:1. In other words, out of every 89 pregnant women, there would be one who would give birth to twins. Before the two-child policy was introduced, the number of births per day in Huaxia was around 20,800. If it was accurate to the second, then Huaxia would give birth to a baby every 4.15 seconds. Even with a 1% probability, Huaxia would give birth to 2,000 pairs of twins per day. After the two-child policy was introduced, this number would double. Twins were not a particularly rare existence. However, the little girl was too young, so when she saw two children who looked exactly the same, she was immediately frightened. After she obediently greeted her grandfather, the little girl immediately shrank behind Chen-shi, then carefully looked at the twins in front of her. The twins were both boys. They had delicate features and were very cute. Twins generally looked very similar because they were identical twins, so the genes they carried were almost the same. A small number of twins did not look alike, but that was because they were heterozygotic twins. If the mother laid 2 eggs and produced 2 fertilized eggs, then the genes they carried would naturally be different. When they grew up, there would be a clear difference. The twins did look very similar, and the children were still young, so even with Chen-shi's eyesight, he could only find a few subtle differences. Seeing that the little girl was a little scared, Chen-shi picked her up, then smiled at the old man and said, "The children look so similar, how do you usually tell them apart?" Hearing this, the old man laughed and said, "The older brother has a mole behind his earlobe, but the younger brother doesn't, but it's not obvious, so I made a mark on their clothes." After that, the old man asked the two children to turn around. Hearing their grandfather's words, the twins obediently turned around and lay on the sofa. At this time, Chen-shi realized that there were numbers written on the back of their clothes. On the left was 1, and on the right was 2. Didn't the 18th National Assembly propose to talk about civilization, so I named the children Civilization. The left is the older brother, and the right is the younger brother, Xia Wen, Xia Ming. Civilization? Chen-shi pondered for a moment, then said to the little fellow with a smile, "Come on, Nyan, introduce yourself to Grandpa." The little guy hugged Shen-shi's neck with one hand and tilted his head to look at the twins. After that, he quickly turned his head and buried his little head in Shen-shi's shoulder. Seeing her like an ostrich, Shen-shi could only say to the old man apologetically, "Sorry, the child is shy, it's okay. My 2 kids used to be afraid of strangers too. I've gotten used to bringing them out for a stroll." After chatting with the old man for a while, Shen-shi suddenly remembered his duty, so he quickly pointed to the price list on the table and said with a smile, "What do you want?" "Vegetarian tea. I have something to do later, so I'll leave after sitting for a while." "Alright, please wait a moment." Shen-shi returned to the bar with the little fellow in his arms. Qin Ruoying also noticed the little fellow's strange behavior, so she quickly asked, "What's wrong?" She probably hasn't seen twins before, so she's scared. While talking, Shen-shi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying had to take the little fellow from Shen-shi's hands, and then explain to her what twins were. At this time, Shen-shi made a cup of tea for the old man. The waiters were on strike, so only he, the boss, had to do it personally. The little fellow rarely dealt with people of the same age. Now there were 2 of them, and they looked exactly the same, so naturally she was scared. After listening to Qin Ruoying's explanation, the little fellow nodded as if he understood something. Tilting her head and thinking for a while, she suddenly pouted and asked, "Mommy, why don't I have a sister who looks exactly the same?" Qin Ruoying was amused by her, so she pinched the tip of her little nose and asked, "You want a sister?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded, then said with anticipation, "I want a sister. A sister can play with me. You only know how to play." In fact, Qin Ruoying had already guessed why she wanted a sister. It was because she was lonely, and there was no one of the same age to play with her. She and Shen-shi had no plans to have a second child for the time being, and distant water could not put out a nearby fire, so the best way now was to bring the little fellow out to interact with people of the same age. Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying carried the little fellow, then walked directly to the twins. Shen-shi placed the teacup in front of the old man, and was about to turn back to the bar when Qin Ruoying brought the little fellow over. The husband and wife had a tacit understanding, and Shen-shi understood her meaning without a word of explanation. Thus, after Shen-shi's introduction, the old man also understood the purpose of Qin Ruoying's visit. Every parent hoped that their children would be able to play with their peers because for children under the age of 6, this was something that would only be beneficial and not detrimental. Seeing that the old man agreed, Qin Ruoying did not stand on ceremony, and directly brought the little fellow to the twins, then smiled at the 2 children and asked, "Can you let your sister play with you?" After hearing her words, the older brother sitting on the left heard her, and without discussing with his younger brother, he immediately said, "Okay." Then, he looked at the old man and asked, "Grandpa, can we play marbles with our sister?" "Go, don't bully her." "No. We won't bully her, we want to protect her." The older brother jumped down from the sofa excitedly, patted his chest, and promised. He directly took the little fellow's hand, like a little adult, and said to the little fellow, "Sister, I'll play with you." "Me too." The younger brother seemed to be afraid that they would miss him, so he immediately squeezed from behind the older brother. Looking at the younger brother, it seemed that he also wanted to hold the little fellow. Thus, Qin Ruoying handed the little fellow's left hand to him. The 2 brothers were actually more than 2 months older than the little fellow. When the 3 of them stood together, they were half a head taller than the little fellow. The 2 brothers took Nyan around the hall. After finding an open space in the corner, they immediately squatted on the ground and took out marbles from their pockets. The little fellow had not played with glass marbles yet. Therefore, when she saw the colorful glass marbles, she was immediately attracted by the glass ball with a strange pattern in the middle. The little fellow grabbed a marble and played with it. Seeing this, the older brother immediately said to her, "Sister, we'll teach you how to play." "Okay." Children could always play together happily. Qin Ruoying stood beside the 3 little fellows with a smile, quietly watching them play marbles. The little fellow had not played with people of the same age for a long time, so in the beginning, she was a little reserved. But after playing for a while, the little fellow gradually let go of herself, and the range of her movements and laughter became louder and louder. Chapter 145. Playing marbles was actually a very fair competitive game, and it was very helpful for children to learn physics in the future. For example, when they learned about parabola, momentum, force, and other subjects, they could not help but think of playing marbles as a child. This also made it easier for children to understand the content of the teacher's lecture. The little girl had never played this kind of game in her life, so she was immediately excited. The twins were already veterans at this game. When they saw that their sister did not know how to play, they let her play. The little girl played 3 times, but they only played once. Qin Ruoying accompanied the children, and Qin Shi accompanied the old man to play Go. However, halfway through the game, the old man's phone suddenly rang. The old man took out his phone and looked at it. His face suddenly sank. After picking up the phone, the old man did not wait for the person on the other end of the phone to speak first. He said directly into the phone, "I'm here, don't rush me." After that, he seemed very impatient and hung up the phone. When Qin Shi saw this, he smiled and asked, "Is there anything else?" "Sigh, some family matters. I have to go. I lost this game. Let's come back another day." The old man shook his head and said. After a gentle sigh, he stood up reluctantly and asked casually, "How much is this tea? You've been sitting here for less than half an hour, and you haven't drunk much tea. You don't have to pay. This bill is on me." Since Qin Shi said so, the old man didn't hold back. After thanking Qin Shi, he told his 2 grandsons that it was time to leave. When the twins heard their grandfather's call, they were stunned for a moment. They could not help but mutter, "So fast." They seemed to know that they had something to do later, so they reluctantly said to the little girl, "Sister, we have to go. We'll come back tomorrow to play with you." While talking, the 2 brothers also picked up the marbles on the ground. When the little girl saw this, her face was full of reluctance. However, there was no other way. They had to leave, so she had to silently help the 2 brothers pick up the marbles. "That green one is mine." When the younger brother saw that his marble was taken away, he was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He pounced and snatched the green marble back from his older brother's hand. The little fellow squatted on the ground and silently watched them pick their marbles. She had a pitiful look on her face, as if she was very reluctant to let the 2 brothers leave. The 2 brothers put away the marbles and stood up. At this time, the elder brother seemed to have noticed the little fellow's abnormality. He hesitated for a moment, but still chose something in his pocket. After a while, the elder brother took out 2 marbles from his pocket and handed them to the little girl. "Sister, these 2 are for you." The little guy was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and glanced at his brother before hesitantly taking the marble from his hand. "And mine. I'll give you 2 as well." The younger brother was never willing to fall behind his older brother. After seeing his older brother give the marbles to the little guy, he also quickly grabbed 2 marbles and stuffed them into the little guy's hands. However, after giving away the marbles, the younger brother regretted it. Because the 2 marbles that his older brother gave were carefully selected with the ugliest patterns, but he gave the 2 prettiest ones. Although he felt a little heartache, the younger brother was still a man after all. So he knew that since he had given it away, he couldn't go back on his words. Thus, he stood together with his older brother and waved goodbye to the little guy. "Goodbye, sister. I'll come and play with you in the future." "And me. I'll come and play with you too." The 2 brothers fought to be the first to say goodbye to the little guy. Seeing this, the little girl also stood up and waved her small hand that was holding the marbles at them. "Goodbye." The twins left. The little guy stood on the spot and lowered his head to look at the marbles in his hands. No one knew what he was thinking about. Qin Ruoying waited quietly for a while before lightly walking over. He squatted beside the little guy and pulled him into his arms. Nyan, your brothers gave you something. Did you say thank you to them? Hearing this, the little guy immediately used his little hands to hug Qin Ruoying's neck. After thinking for a while, she then asked in anticipation beside Qin Ruoying's ear, Mama, when will my brothers come and play with me again? Qin Ruoying smiled and didn't answer immediately. She carried the little guy to Qin Shi's side. Qin Shi took the little guy and used his hand to scratch the tip of her little nose. He then smiled and said to her, Your brothers will come again tomorrow and play with you again. Are you happy? Happy. Hearing Qin Shi's words, the little guy finally broke into a smile and happily played with the marbles. Seeing this, the husband and wife both laughed. Twins were really much more fortunate than only children. The next morning, the little guy seemed to still be thinking about the two little brothers who looked exactly the same yesterday. So just after drinking a mouthful of pumpkin porridge, she couldn't wait to shout that she wanted to go to the tea house. Nyan, don't be anxious. Finish your breakfast first. It's still early now. They won't come even if you go. Qin Ruoying served the little guy breakfast while Qin Shi tidied up the room. After the family of three finished breakfast and were about to leave for the tea house, the door of the east wing suddenly opened. Qin Shueching actually went out. She had just walked out of the door when she saw the family of three standing on the steps of the west wing, staring straight at her. Stunned for a moment, Qin Shueching asked awkwardly, What's wrong? Oh, did the sun rise from the west today? Qin Shi said as he pretended to look at the sky. Qin Shueching heard him say this and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. During this period of time, she and Qin Yongyan hid in the room all day to cultivate. They didn't even eat on time. Luckily, Qin Shi left food for them every day. Cultivate, eat, and sleep. They only did these three things every day. They were simply lazy. Qin Ruoying knew his sister's character very well. He was afraid that Qin Shi's joke would make her angry again, so he asked with a smile, Are you going out? Yes, I just received a call from the leader. There's something I need to deal with. Then be careful. If there's a problem, you can call us. Hearing this, Qin Shueching couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying, then quickly glanced at Qin Shi. Then, she nodded slightly hesitantly and said, Okay, then I'll go first. Go ahead. After Qin Shueching quickly walked out of the courtyard, Qin Shi looked at Qin Ruoying with a half-smile. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying asked with a smile, If Yueqing encounters any problems, as her brother-in-law, will you help? Of course. Of course I'll help. After saying that, Qin Shi suddenly laughed, and then carried Qin Ruoying up by the waist. This sudden action immediately shocked Qin Ruoying. She quickly patted his arm and said, Hey, what are you doing? Put me down. Let's go. Lady boss, let's open for business. Qin Shi carried Qin Ruoying by the waist, Qin Ruoying carried the little fellow, and the little fellow carried the big cat. Chapter 146. The business of the tea house was not good today, and there were no customers in the morning. The little fellow was lying on the bar, playing with the marbles that the brothers gave her. It was really boring to play marbles alone. After playing for a while, the little fellow felt a little bored, so she looked up and kept asking Qin Shi when the two little brothers from yesterday would come. The old man just said that they would come, but Qin Shi did not know when they would come. Seeing that the little fellow was about to explode, the couple thought about it, and simply took her to the corner yesterday, and then squatted on the ground to play marbles with her. For marbles, a family of three. Seeing that her parents were willing to play with her, the little fellow immediately became happy. Playing marbles was actually very similar to playing billiards, and they both required certain skills. Qin Shi playing marbles was no different from opening a plug-in. In order to let the little fellow play to her heart's content, he had to deliberately miss every time. The little fellow learned the professional posture that the twins taught her, and after a tireless effort, she finally hit Qin Shi's marbles. Papa! I won! I won! After grabbing the marbles in front of Qin Shi, the little fellow excitedly giggled at Qin Shi. Nian is so good, do you still want to play? Yes. As if afraid that her father would not play with her, the little fellow quickly handed the marbles to Qin Shi. Qin Shi took the marbles, put them back on the ground, and then said to her with a smile, Nian, Papa doesn't know how to play, you have to give in to Papa a little. Okay. I will give in to Papa. The little fellow nodded again and again like a chicken pecking rice. But after restarting the game, her luck was off the charts, so she hit Qin Shi's marble right away. Oh, Nian, you are getting better and better. Papa is so stupid. I won again. The couple squatted beside the little fellow, looking at their daughter's flushed face because of too much excitement. They could not help but reach out and pinch her little face. Annoying. Papa is annoying. Mama is so annoying. The little fellow twisted her body to avoid the attack, which made Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying laugh out loud. With the company of his parents, the boring morning passed quickly. The three of them had just finished lunch when the door of the tea house was pushed open. The old man came as promised. Traveling with him was naturally the twin brother that the little fellow had been looking forward to for a long time. After the short interaction yesterday, the three little guys had cultivated a deep enough friendship. So when the two brothers walked into the tea house, they immediately looked around for the little fellow. Sister, we're here. After seeing the little fellow, the two brothers hurriedly ran out and surrounded her. Then, as if he was presenting a treasure, the elder brother took out a small car from his pocket and said to the little fellow, Sister, look. I brought you something good. After he finished speaking, he laid on the ground and slowly pulled the trolley back. When he let go of his hand, the cart immediately moved forward. The little fellow had never played with this kind of toy before, so she immediately ran over and picked up the cart from the ground to study it. Seeing this, the younger brother grabbed the cart from the little fellow's hand and stuffed his kaleidoscope into the little fellow's hand. Sister, look at this. This is fun. Seeing this, the elder brother immediately became unhappy. He quickly grabbed the cart back from his younger brother and said to him with dissatisfaction, My cart is fun. As he spoke, he wanted to put the cart back into the little fellow's hand. Seeing this, the younger brother was not to be outdone and shouted to his elder brother, The kaleidoscope is fun. The cart is fun. The kaleidoscope is fun. The little fellow held the kaleidoscope in one hand and the cart in the other. She foolishly watched the two brothers quarrel in front of her. Looking at the situation, if they were allowed to quarrel a few more words, they would probably fight. Qin Ruoying had no choice but to step forward to stop them, and then said to the little fellow, Nian, don't you want to play marbles? Let your elder brothers play with you. With Qin Ruoying's mediation, the two brothers put down their dispute, squatted on the ground with the little fellow, and played the marbles that they didn't enjoy yesterday. After Qin Shi made a cup of tea for the old man, he played Go with him again. Because of the old man's face, Qin Shi held back a few moves, and finally lost by 3 pieces. The old man won with difficulty, but because of this, he stopped looking down on him. He just wanted to play casually before, but he didn't expect that the tea house owner was really a master at such a young age. He actually had to use all his strength to win by chance. The two of them chatted while playing Go. Through chatting, they learned that the old man's surname was Gu, and he was already 65 years old this year. He lived in Binhai Alley, which was less than 200 meters away from Dongming Alley. The twins' surname was Xia, but the old man's surname was Gu. Obviously, he was their grandfather. Qin Shi casually asked about the old man's family affairs, but he didn't expect the old man to shake his head after listening. He couldn't help but sigh, I don't want to talk about these things. Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't ask more. The two of them continued to play Go. This game of Go was only interesting when the opponent was a match. If the opponent was too strong or too weak, it would be boring after 2 games. Qin Shi's level was so much higher than the old man's that when he let the old man kill his dragon, the old man didn't notice anything strange. Instead, he proudly said that Qin Shi was inexperienced. Qin Shi nodded with a smile, and then invited the old man to play another game. Recently, it had been a bit gloomy. Although it didn't snow, the sun didn't come out much. Today was the worst day in history, but at the same time, it was also the happiest day for the little girl. The heater in the tea house was on full blast. Chen Shi and the old man played Go leisurely, while the three little guys were chattering non-stop. Qin Ruoying put on light music, then sat on the sofa next to them and quietly read a book. Perhaps they were tired from playing marbles, so the three little guys sat on the sofa to rest. Then, the older brother came up with a new trick. Flipping flower rope. The two brothers probably played it at home, so after Qin Ruoying helped them find a rope, the two brothers immediately showed it to the little girl. The older brother first tied the rope into a noose, then flipped out a square cross with his fingers. When the younger brother saw this, he immediately reached over. After flipping it a few times, the noose was in his hand. Then, a double cross pattern appeared on the younger brother's hand. At first, the little girl didn't think it was anything strange. But when she saw the younger brother casually flip and create a new pattern, her interest was finally aroused. The older brother was not to be outdone. After glancing at the double cross on the younger brother's hand, he put his thumb through it, and with a hook of his little finger, a mosquito net suddenly appeared from his hand. Amazing! The little girl stared with her eyes wide open. She didn't even dare to blink her eyes at their performance. So she immediately looked at the brothers and said with some expectation, "Can you teach me?" Hearing this, the older brother immediately took back his hand, took the rope, and handed it to the little girl. "Sister, come, I'll teach you." However, before the little girl reached out to take it, the younger brother suddenly snatched the rope from the older brother's hand, then held the rope and said to the little girl, "Sister, don't let him teach you." "I'll teach you." "Give it to me." "I'll teach you." "No." "I'll teach you." "I'll teach you." "I'll teach you." Seeing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help shaking her head and laughing. Chapter 147. Gu Lao was a retired man, and his only job now was to take care of his grandchildren. The two brothers seemed to be very well behaved now, but in fact, they were much more naughty than Ninian. If the two brothers stayed in one place for a long time, there would probably be footprints on the ceiling. No matter where they went, the two brothers were together, so they were much bolder than the average child. If it weren't for the little girl in the tea house, they probably wouldn't have been able to sit still and would have clamored to go out and play. Gu Lao was in good health, but taking care of these two naughty boys usually tired him out. Today, it was rare that the two brothers didn't bother him, so Gu Lao was naturally happy to be free. The three of them sat in the tea house for the whole afternoon. Chen Shi patiently played Go with the old man. He controlled his level very well, and after a few games, his record became 2 wins and 3 losses. Such a well-matched match also thoroughly aroused the old man's competitive spirit, and he became more and more focused when playing Go. 4:20 in the afternoon. Not long after the 6th game started, Chen Shi's phone suddenly rang. He took out his phone and found that the caller was Ning Qiudong, who he hadn't contacted for a long time. Since Chen Shi hung up on Ning Zhonghua last time, the father and daughter of the Ning family didn't bother him again. Ning Qiudong's sudden call probably meant that she needed his help with something again. After thinking for a while, Chen Shi smiled apologetically at Gu Lao, and then picked up the phone. "Hello? Mr. Chen? It's me, Ning Qiudong." As soon as he picked up the phone, Chen Shi heard a little nervousness in Ning Qiudong's tone. The reason why Ning Zhonghua's attitude was so bad when he talked to him last time was because he couldn't find any clues about Ying at that time, which caused him to be in a bad mood. Now that he found his wife, and the family lived happily together, Chen Shi naturally returned to his previous harmless appearance. Come to think of it, the father and daughter of the Ning family had helped him a lot in the past, although most of it was a combination of interests. However, they were sensible and knew when to advance and retreat, so Chen Shi didn't mind continuing to maintain a relationship with them. Thus, he smiled and asked, "It's me. What's the matter?" After confirming that Chen Shi was not very resistant to her, Ning Qiudong immediately said excitedly, "Mr. Chen, can you save my father?" What happened to your father?" He was kidnapped. What happened? Dad didn't come home yesterday, and I couldn't get through to him on the phone. I thought he had something important to do, so I didn't look for him. I didn't expect to suddenly receive a call from the kidnappers this morning. Did you call the police? Yes, the police are at my house right now. Since you've already called the police, you should listen to the police. What's the use of telling me? After saying this, Chin-shi seemed to feel that it wasn't very nice of him to say this, so he quickly added, "You're pretty rich, right? If you can't save him, then you can use the money to solve the problem. Save him first, you can earn the money later." Hearing this, Ning Chodong said with a sobbing tone, "The kidnappers don't want money, they only want the pills you gave Dad last time." Chen-shi frowned slightly. Pills? Could it be the accomplices of the two Nanyang people last time? While Chen-shi was still thinking, Ning Chodong thought that Chen-shi didn't want to, so she begged, "Mr. Chen, Dad told me not to call you. Although the police have already started to act, I still feel very worried. I don't want to risk Dad's life, so I took the liberty to call you. I hope you don't mind." "Okay, I understand." Hearing her terrified voice, Chen-shi interrupted her and said directly, "Do you know where my house is? I still have a few pills left at home. They're on a plate under the coffee table in the living room. You can go and get them, but remember not to break the lock." "Thank you, Mr. Chen." "Thank you. That's it then." After saying this, Chen-shi hung up the phone. At this time, Gu Lao looked at Chen-shi with a slightly surprised look and asked directly, "Use the money to solve the problem? Your friend was kidnapped?" Chen-shi smiled and shook his head. He casually explained, "A friend is in debt outside, and the loan sharks came looking for him. His family is worried, so they called me." Hearing this, Gu Lao also shook his head and said emotionally, "Why would a normal person deal with loan sharks? Your friend is probably not a decent person. I'll take advantage of my seniority to give you a piece of advice. It's better if you don't deal with this kind of people in the future. Otherwise, one day you might be involved." Chen-shi nodded and said yes. After laughing, he did not continue the topic. Seeing this, Gu Lao did not say anything more. The two continued to play Go, and Chen-shi thought about Ning Zhongguo's incident. He really didn't expect that a mere simplified version of the foundation elixir would actually involve so many things. After Ning Zhongguo and Su Wei were warned by him last time, they had promised that they would definitely minimize the impact of the pill. However, some fires were easy to ignite, but difficult to extinguish. After all, according to the rumors, it was a miracle pill that could change one's fate. Who wouldn't want it? Ning Zhongguo and Su Wei had shot themselves in the foot. Not only did they not make much money, but they also got into trouble because of it. Thinking about it, this was the second time Ning Zhongguo was kidnapped because of the pill. However, this time he was smart. After seeing the tip of the iceberg of Chen-shi's strength, Ning Zhongguo had already made up his mind. No matter what, he would not say anything about Chen-shi. Instead, he insisted that the hidden expert who could refine the miracle pill had already passed away. Ning Chodong also knew about Chen-shi's existence. However, because of Ning Zhongguo's warning, she hesitated for a long time before finally plucking up the courage to call Chen-shi. The kidnappers only wanted the pill and not the money. However, there were no more pills. Could it be that she had to use a fake pill in exchange for her father's life? What if the other party saw through it? This was a serious matter. Ning Chodong did not dare to take the risk, so she thought of looking for Chen-shi. Fortunately, Chen-shi was much easier to deal with compared to the kidnappers. After getting Chen-shi's permission, Ning Chodong hurriedly rushed to the Kangju district, ready to exchange the pill for Ning Zhongguo's life. It was just a simplified version of the energy pill. Chen-shi could have as many as he wanted, so he did not care much. Old Ning's performance this time was not bad. Those few pills were his reward. As for the kidnappers, Chen-shi was not the police. Why would he care so much? Ning Zhongguo was a famous business tycoon in Zhonghai. Since he was kidnapped, the Zhonghai police would naturally do their best to ensure his safety. Chapter 148. Gu Lao was a very particular person. For the past 2 days, he would take the twins to the tea house after lunch every day. At 5:00 in the afternoon, Gu Lao would refuse Chen Shi's dinner invitation and then take the reluctant twins home for dinner. A cup of vegetarian tea a day was only 20 yuan. Chen Shi didn't accept it, but he insisted on giving it. He always said that it was a different matter. On this day, when Gu Lao took the twins to the tea house again, he suddenly found that there was a children's playground in the tea house. It turned out that the couple saw that the 3 little guys would spend most of their time lying on the ground, so after some discussion, they simply removed the row of booths on the left side of the bar. The empty space was about 7 or 8 square meters. Chen Shi first circled the area with a plastic fence, and then covered it with colorful children's climbing mats. The twins often brought some small toys for the little guy these 2 days, which opened the little guy's eyes, but also gave her the idea of wanting her parents to buy her toys. Chen Shi suddenly realized that he had not bought any toys for Ninian since he came back for so long. So, he discussed with Qin Ruoying to buy a lot of things in Jingdong. Within the 3rd ring road of Shangjing, the Jingdong delivery would arrive the next morning. Chen Shi bought a set of Barbie dolls for the little guy and 2 or 3 sets of accessories for her. Fantasy wardrobes, villas, castles, holiday homes, everything was available. Maybe Nian had a talent for music? A children's electronic organ was needed. Maybe Nian had a talent for painting? Children's paintbrushes, crayons, watercolors, and a painting kit were needed. Nian lacked companionship, so a children's intelligent robot toy was needed. There was also a set of Lego bricks, puzzle toys, good stuff. The couple was addicted to buying. You choose one, I choose one. When Qin Ruoying came back to her senses, the settlement price of the shopping cart had reached more than 8,000 yuan. This was not good. How many toys to buy for the child was a very particular thing. After research by scholars at the University of Virginia, they found that the best number of toys to buy for the child was 5. If there are less than 5 toys, children may feel inferior. But if there were more than 5, not only would the toys not be played enough, but it would also limit the child's creativity. It was also proven that the more toys there were at home, the lower the frequency of children playing with them. Too many toys would distract a child's attention, and it was easy for the child to develop the bad habit of 3-minute enthusiasm. On the other hand, if the number of toys was small, the child would get tired of playing with them. At the same time, if they couldn't get new toys, the bored child would create new ways to play. This was human nature, just like how primitive people created songs and dances out of boredom after eating and sleeping. Therefore, children who liked to study were often more intelligent. At the same time, because they had fewer toys, they were more focused. Of course, it was also wrong not to buy a toy for the child. All the other children had toys, but he didn't. While children envied others, they would also develop feelings of inferiority, which would seriously affect the child's mental health. The number of 5 toys was not an absolute standard. After all, every child was different, so the real effective standard still needed the parents to observe and figure it out. After Qin Ruoying's reminder, Chen Shi had to sift through the shopping cart regretfully. In the end, there were only Barbie dolls, Lego bricks, and an electronic piano left. When the twins came to the tea house, the little girl was lying in the children's playground, piling up Lego bricks. Because of the new toys, she didn't ask for a brother today. When the brothers saw the children's playground that Chen Shi had carefully decorated, they immediately ran to the fence and said to the little girl with envy, "Sister, can we come in and play?" "Okay. But Mommy said that we have to take off our shoes when we come in to play." "Okay. We'll take it off." Hearing this, the brothers quickly kicked off the shoes on their feet and couldn't wait to open the fence door. After getting in, they directly lay next to the little girl and played with her with Lego bricks. The 3 little guys made a lot of noise in the tea house, so Qin Ruoying played light music to cover up their chattering noise. Recently, the tea house's business had been declining day by day. It was probably directly related to these three little guys. If this trend continued, it was estimated that the tea house would become a children's playground sooner or later. Chin Ruoying sat at the bar, reading a book and drinking tea. The giggles of the three little guys from time to time made her smile faintly. Looking up at her lover who was playing chess with Gu Lao, Chin Ruoying felt like she was in a dream. Wasn't this kind of peaceful and comfortable life what she had always dreamed of? Chin Ruoying sat behind the bar in a daze, her face full of happiness. But at this moment, a melodious ringtone suddenly rang out. It was her cell phone that was ringing. She got this cell phone after returning to Shangjing. Only the three of them in her family knew her number. Chin Ruoying quickly picked it up and took a look. Sure enough, the caller was Qin Yongyan. The call was connected. But the first sentence from Qin Yongyan shocked Chin Ruoying. "Yingying, Qingqing is injured, what happened to her?" It said that she was ambushed and shot in the arm with a sniper rifle. If she didn't dodge quickly, she would be a dead person now. But even so, one of her hands is considered disabled. Chin Ruoying was stunned. Holding the cell phone, she froze in place. At this time, after Qin excused himself from Gu Lao, he got up and went to the bar. He had already heard the conversation between the father and daughter. He patted Chin Ruoying's back gently, indicating that she should not worry. She took the phone from Chin Ruoying and asked Qin Yongyan, "Where is she now?" "In Dianzhou." "I'll be right there." "Okay." Hearing Qi's words, Qin Yongyan immediately felt relieved. After telling Qin the specific location, he hung up the phone. Qin was very clear about his sister-in-law's strength. When she left a few days ago, she had successfully broken through the Alcade state. But unexpectedly, she was lucky enough to survive because of this. The reason why martial arts declined was that human society had completely entered the era of firearms. Even a child as old as Nian Nian could easily kill a martial arts master who had practiced martial arts for many years with a gun. The bullet speed of a sniper rifle was generally about 900 meters per second, and the speed of sound was only 340 meters per second. This speed was 2.5 times faster than the speed of sound. If Qin Wanqing was still in the transforming strength stage, she wouldn't have been able to dodge this fatal shot. She was indeed lucky. Chapter 149. Something had happened to Qin Xueqing. But it was Qin Yongyan who had called to inform them. In other words, Qin Xueqing was probably not out of danger yet. Qin Ruoying only had one sister. Although Qin Xueqing especially liked to compete with her when she was young, it was just a childish tantrum. It was obviously impossible to say that the two sisters had no feelings for each other. Qin Xueqing actually cared about her sister very much, just like how Qin Ruoying cared about her. It was just that she always appeared cold and aloof. Qin Ruoying was not very sure what would happen if she was shot in the arm by a sniper rifle. But Qin Yongyan had already said on the phone that one of Qingqing's hands was crippled. She was originally a martial arts fanatic. If one of her hands was really crippled, what kind of blow would it be to her? The more Qin Ruoying thought about it, the more afraid she became. She could not help but hold Qin's hand tightly, looking a little frightened. Seeing this, Qin gently hugged her into his arms and comforted her softly. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Qin Ruoying gently leaned her head on Qin's chest. After adjusting her emotions, she said softly, "Go and see Qingqing, okay?" Qin nodded, then lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruoying's lips. Perhaps because Qin was by her side, Qin Ruoying could not help but feel a little more relaxed after their lips parted. The couple turned their heads to the left side of the bar. The three little guys were sitting on the climbing mat, with a pile of Lego blocks in front of each of them. They were comparing whose block castle looked better. "Nian Nian, Daddy has to go out for a while. I'll be back soon. Be good at home and listen to Mommy, okay?" Chen Shi's tone was full of negotiation because he was worried that the little guy would suddenly flip out. However, the little fellow's reaction was somewhat out of Chen Shi's expectations. She looked up at Chen Shi. After thinking for a while, the little girl suddenly grinned and said, "Goodbye, Papa. I'll wait for you at home." As she spoke, she waved her hand at Chen Shi. At this moment, the twins waved at Chen Shi and shouted, "Goodbye, Uncle." Seeing this, Chen Shi was stunned for a moment. Then, he patted the heads of the three little guys one by one. The little fellow suddenly stopped clinging to him. It probably had something to do with these two brothers. Chen Shi didn't know that the two brothers were brought up by Gu Lao. Their parents were very busy with work, so they rarely accompanied them when they were young. After the brothers explained their situation to the little fellow finally understood how happy she was now. Therefore, when Chen Shi proposed to go out, Nian Nian was very generous. Because she now understood that adults need to go out to work, so they can't be with their children all day. The little fellow was very generous, which relieved Chen Shi of his worries. After briefly explaining the situation to Gu Lao, Qin Ruoying followed Chen Shi to the courtyard behind the tea house. "I'm here, don't worry. Well, after you understand the situation, remember to give me a call, okay?" Chen Shi reached out and gently touched Qin Ruoying's face. After taking her into his arms and kissing her again, he smiled and said, "Let's go." Then, under Qin Ruoying's gaze, Chen Shi disappeared in the air in an instant. After sighing softly, Qin Ruoying turned and returned to the tea house. Spring City. What was Spring City? There was no cold in winter, no hot in summer, and spring all year round. Spring City was the provincial capital of Dianzhou. It was one of the important central cities in the western region of Huaxia. At the same time, it was also the gateway city to Southeast Asia and South Asia. Spring City was surrounded by mountains on three sides and Dianxi Lake on the south. Because it was located in a low-latitude plateau, it formed a unique climate of spring all year round. Especially with the plateau Lake Dianxi Lake regulating the temperature and humidity, the annual average temperature here was always maintained around 16.5 degrees Celsius. The air was really fresh and the climate was pleasant. As a second-tier city, Spring City was naturally not as prosperous as Zhonghai or as grand as Shangjing. But there was one thing that Spring City was better than these two cities. That was, there was no smog. Of course, the high altitude in exchange for spring all year round came at the price of low humidity. After living for a long time, people's skin would become very dry. But for people with rheumatoid diseases, this was simply a holy land for health. Rome City Military District, Spring City General Hospital. Senior Officials Ward. The senior officials ward here was not as high-end as the 301 hospital in Shangjing, but it had the advantage of having a high floor and a good environment. There were wardrobes, fridges, washrooms, and bathrooms. The area was not big, but it had everything. Because of excessive blood loss, Qin Shueqing was still in shock. As a newly promoted martial arts grandmaster, her physique was indeed better than ordinary people. After the heavy sniper rifle locked on, she could still sense the danger and dodge in time while being restrained by others. However, although she dodged the fatal shot, her entire right hand was disabled because of it. Because of the appearance of various supernatural dramas in recent years, many people mistakenly thought that after being shot in the head by a sniper rifle, it would only leave a small hole in the forehead. But in reality, if someone was really shot in the head by a sniper rifle, their head would explode like a big watermelon, and they would become a headless corpse in an instant. The so-called heavy sniper rifle was actually a 50 anti-material sniper rifle. The main targets of this type of rifle were armored vehicles, airplanes, and fortifications. Its advantages were its long range, high power, and high accuracy. Its disadvantages were that there was usually only one bullet in the magazine, and it took a long time to reload. If one was directly hit by this type of rifle, if one was lucky, it might only break in two. But if one was unlucky, it might be all over the place. There was no way to collect the corpse. Qin Shueqing's arm was broken on the spot. Fortunately, she was not an ordinary person. Otherwise, when her entire arm was broken, her shoulder blade might be pulled and a part of her body would be forcibly torn off. This was the true power of modern weapons. Because of excessive blood loss, Qin Shueqing was still in a coma. A group of people stood outside her ward. They had been waiting here for a whole day and night, but Qin Shueqing still did not wake up. A man who looked to be in his 30s stood up and glanced at Qin Wanqing, who was lying on the hospital bed through the glass window. He seemed to have made a decision as he turned around and walked out with an ashen face. Third brother. Stop. Where are you going? Before the man called third brother could take 2 steps, he was pulled back by his companion behind him. He did not say a word and wanted to shake off his companion, but his companion grabbed his arm tightly and did not allow him to leave. The two of them started arguing. The people around them hurriedly surrounded them and tried to persuade them to calm down. While they were arguing, the elevator door opened with a ding sound. A man slowly walked out of the elevator. He stood in the corridor and looked around. After confirming the room number, he walked directly to the senior official's ward where they were. Third brother was in a fit of anger. When he saw that the man was being so rude, he immediately reached out his hand to stop him. Stop. Who the F***ck are you? Do you know where this place is? The man glanced at him, then pointed to the ward behind him and asked, Is Qin Shueqing here? Who the F***ck are you? Third brother's attitude was very bad, so the man did not want to talk to him. After glancing at him indifferently, he wanted to walk past him and go straight to the ward. Third brother was instantly furious. He reached out his hand to drag the man back. However, before his hand could touch the man's clothes, a huge force slammed him against the wall. Chapter 150. Brother-in-law? The people outside the ward could not help but look at each other when they heard this. After saying that, she didn't bother to pay attention to them anymore. She walked past them and entered the ward. No one dared to stop him. This was because Lao San had been slapped into the wall by him. Just this move alone was enough to intimidate them. Everyone knew their stuff because they knew Lao San's martial arts level very well. He was at the peak of covert strength. He could send a warrior at the peak of covert strength flying with a casual slap. This young man in front of them was at least a Wu Dao Supreme Master. The few people outside the ward pondered over his self-revealing identity for a while and were skeptical about it for the time being. However, Lao San did not believe it. After Shi pushed him back, Lao San immediately took out a pistol from his waist and roared at the others with a red face, F***ck, you don't even know who this person is. How dare you let him in? After that, he rushed into the ward aggressively with a gun. In the ward, Qin Shueqing was lying on the bed with a pale face. Seeing his proud sister-in-law suddenly lying on the bed, Shi could not help but frown slightly. Just as he was about to approach the bed, Lao Sen rushed in with a gun. Stop right there. Raise. Get out. Before he could finish his words, Shi had already turned sideways and glared at him. Then he spat out a word coldly. Before Qin Shueqing reached the gang state, she could only let Shi do whatever he wanted to her, let alone Lao San, who had not even reached the peak strength stage. Therefore, Shi did not do anything. Lao San's chest suddenly felt like he was hit by a hammer. His whole body immediately flew out. Shi did not hurt him. After he flew out of the ward, he closed the door behind him. Lao San's companions outside the door quickly caught him and prevented him from falling to the ground. Seeing this, the companion who had just argued with Old Third could not help but blurt out, using chi to control objects, a great grandmaster in the gang state. Hearing this, the expressions of the people outside the door changed drastically. Gang state? So young? Is he really the brother-in-law of the section chief? That should be it. He looks a few years younger than me. I didn't expect him to already be a great grandmaster, a great grandmaster in the gang state, was a legendary existence for people who had been practicing martial arts since childhood. Qin Shueqing had just broken through to the Alcade state and had not had time to stabilize her state, so she did not tell them that she had already stepped into the Alcade state. Old Third finally calmed down a lot after being hit by such a heavy blow. When he stood up again with the help of his companions, he didn't try to chase them away. Instead, he squeezed to the glass window and looked at the situation in the room. This was the Chengdu Military Region Spring City General Hospital. No matter how bold those Nanyang monkeys were, it was unlikely that they would come here to cause trouble. The reason why OL-3 stopped Qin Shi from entering was because he was in a bad mood. He wanted to vent his anger on someone, but he did not expect to bump into an iron plate. At this time, Qin Shi was already standing next to Qin Shueqing. He lifted a corner of Qin Shueqing's blanket and looked at her empty sleeve with a frown. Then, he gently placed his right hand on Qin Shueqing's forehead. 3 seconds later, Qin Shi slowly withdrew his right hand, and Qin Shueqing slowly woke up. The section chief is awake. Damn! That's awesome. Let's go in and have a look. They pushed and shoved outside the door, but they found that they could not get in. The door seemed to be locked from the inside. Qin Shueqing's head shook left and right, followed by a painful groan. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly. Perhaps it was because the light was too dazzling, so Qin Shueqing frowned and took a while to adjust to it. Then, she slowly opened her eyes. After all, she was a great master in the gang state, and her body was much stronger than ordinary people. After a short period of adjustment, Qin Shueqing used her left hand to support herself to sit up. The ward was filled with the faint smell of disinfectant. This was the 13th floor, and the bright morning sun shone into the room through the window. In a trance, Qin Shueqing vaguely remembered that she had a very long dream. That dream was too long. So when she woke up, she felt as if she had gone from a cold winter full of snow to a warm spring full of the fragrance of flowers. Sensing that there was someone beside her, Qin Shueqing turned to look at the figure and was slightly stunned. After a long while, she asked in a hoarse voice, "Why are you here? Where is this?" "Spring City, Military Hospital." "Hospital?" Qin Shueqing muttered. Immediately after, she seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly turned her head to look at her right arm. Sure enough, the empty sleeve was swaying slightly. The memory before she fainted flashed in her mind like a slideshow. She remembered. She, who had already stepped into the gang state, was like a real god in front of those Nanyang monkeys, and they were forced to retreat. She even remembered the despair on those Nanyang people's faces. The leader of those Nanyang people was also a martial arts master. When she fought with them, they pretended to be defeated and lured her to chase after them. As a martial artist, Qin Shueqing had her own confidence and pride. So she subconsciously thought that every martial arts master should have their own pride. She really didn't expect that the other party had already arranged a sniper and was just waiting for her to take the bait. Qin Shueqing's hard work during this period of time was not wasted. Although Qin Shi didn't teach her any spells, after being shot, she still relied on her instincts and decisively released all of the true essence in her body to force the enemy back. She also fought for a chance of survival for herself, holding on until reinforcements arrived. She survived, and her broken arm was brought back by her companions. But unfortunately, she was shot in the upper arm, and the bullet immediately turned her upper arm into minced meat. With this degree of injury, there was no way to perform a limb replantation surgery, so the doctor could only amputate her arm. Now that she lost her right arm, she was considered a disabled person, right? Not to mention that she was also a martial arts master. Even if an ordinary person suddenly became disabled, they probably wouldn't be able to accept this fact in a short period of time. A one-armed knife, that was a scene that only appeared in movies and TV series. If a martial artist didn't even have a complete body, how could they talk about martial arts? Although she could defeat a normal neutralizing master with one hand, what if the other party was in the same realm as her? Thinking of this, Qin Shueqing's face couldn't help but darken. She seemed to have lost her luster. Because she had lost too much blood, her face was a little pale, and her lips were slightly chapped. It seemed that she didn't want Qin to see her weak and helpless appearance. After a trace of pain flashed across Qin Shuiqing's face, she acted as usual and said coldly, "You go back first. I want to rest for a while." After saying this, she lay back on the bed. Qin Shi stood to her left. After lying down, she found that Qin Shi was still looking at her, so she turned to her right. Her right arm was already missing. With her body pressed down, the wound suddenly burst open, and blood instantly seeped out of the gauze. Qin Shuiqing let out a soft groan. Then, she used her left hand to grab the quilt and pull it up, covering her head with it. "I want to sleep. Please leave." Qin Shuiqing hid under the quilt and said in a muffled voice. But at the same time, 2 streams of hot tears quietly fell from his eyes. She turned sideways, stretched her head forward, and tried to wipe the tears on her face with the quilt. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. She was Qin Shuiqing, a martial arts great master who had stepped into the gang state before the age of 30. Qin Shi stood aside, quietly looking at his sister-in-law who was hiding under the quilt and quietly crying. He couldn't help but sigh slightly. After all, she was just a little woman. After sighing, Qin Shi made a new move. However, this move was a little rough. Because he directly lifted Qin Shuiqing's quilt. Qin Shuiqing was lying on the bed. It seemed that she didn't expect that Qin Shi would dare to lift her quilt, so she was stunned on the spot. After the quilt fell to the ground, Qin Shuiqing came to her senses. "What are you doing? Are you trying to mock me? Or are you pitying me?" She sat up and roared at Qin Shi, but there was still a trace of tears on her face that hadn't dried yet. Qin Shi didn't say anything. The two of them looked at each other silently. Qin Shuiqing didn't see sarcasm or pity in Qin Shi's eyes, but calmness. It was as calm as a lake deep in the mountains, without any emotion. Qin Shi saw despair and pain in Qin Shuiqing's eyes. This broken arm made her finally understand what despair was, after a long time. Qin Shi finally broke the silence. Chapter 151. Kill. Qin Shuiqing was stunned. Suddenly, she remembered the scene she saw in the village. It was this harmless-looking man in front of her who used frost and snow as a sword and killed the legend of the village. Was he here to support her? Qin Shuiqing stared blankly at Qin Shi. There were still traces of tears in the corners of her eyes. That pitiful look on her face made her look like a little woman who had just broken up with her boyfriend and was currently feeling extremely sad. Her weeping beauty and pitiful appearance gave Qin Shi a headache. After a slight cough, Qin Shi said in a low voice, "Let's go. I will avenge you." Qin Shuiqing did not speak. She was stunned for a moment. Then, she suddenly curled up her legs. She sat on the bed and hugged her legs with her left hand. Then, she lowered her head and pressed it tightly against her knees. Qin Shuiqing gritted her teeth and tried not to cry. However, Qin Shi's 5 senses detected the slight trembling of her shoulders and the faint sound of her sobbing. The blow of losing an arm was too heavy for a woman like her who had always been confident and conceited. Blowing the mud up to the clouds, raising the flesh and bones of the dead. In this sentence, the words raise and flesh were both methods of using. If translated in plain language, it should be making the dead stand up, making the bones grow flesh. Coming back from the dead, and making the bones grow flesh. This was the method of immortals. Wasn't it just a broken arm? Even if she was broken into 2 pieces, Qin Shi had a way to put her back together. However, after careful consideration, Qin Shi did not intend to tell Qin Shuiqing that he had a way to save her now. Because his character was indeed flawed. As the saying goes, kindness is like water. Those who are too strong break easily, and those who are soft will never be defeated. Misfortune may be a blessing in disguise, and a blessing may be a curse in disguise. With the experience of losing her hand this time, it was not necessarily a bad thing to let this proud daughter of heaven have a taste of bitterness and temper her. Qin Shuiqing hugged her legs in pain silently. Qin Shi was not in a hurry. He just stood silently by the bed and looked at her. After a while, Qin Shuiqing gradually calmed down. She rested her head on her knees and carelessly rubbed it twice. Only then did she raise her head and look at Qin Shi with red eyes. She asked, "Did Big Sister tell you to come?" This woman's logical thinking seemed to be jumping around a bit. Qin Shi did not expect that she would ask such a question after crying for a while. Why did it sound like she was treating him as an outsider? If he asked himself honestly, he should have done a good job as a brother-in-law. After pondering for a moment, Qin Shi nodded and said softly, "Uncle Qin and Ying are very worried about you, so I came to check on you first." "What about you?" Qin Shi did not understand what she wanted to say. But at this time, Qin Shuiqing had already turned her head and looked to the other side. She glanced at the closet next to her and then directly walked out of the bed. "You go out first. I want to change my clothes." "Okay, I'll wait for you outside." Seeing that she seemed to be much better, Qin Shi did not waste any more time and directly walked out of the ward. Outside the ward, those people were still blocking the door and eavesdropping. When they saw Qin Shi coming over, they scattered like birds and beasts. Qin Shi opened the door. Those people were already sitting or standing in positions. There were a total of 4 men and 1 woman here. They were all Qin Shuiqing's subordinates. What did Qin Shuiqing do? She was a direct subordinate of the Wu Lian headquarters in Shangjing. She was the director of the Emergency Operations Management Office for special events. She was a section chief, so everyone called her Section Chief Qin. The Wu Lian was an administrative unit, so naturally, it used the administrative rank. Her position as a section chief did not seem high, but she had special rights. One of them was that it was not illegal to kill people. When the Wu Lian's department was on a mission in another country, they had the right to request the local police to cooperate with the operation. If the situation was special, they could even apply to the higher-ups for local armed police and military support. Qin Shuiqing's Emergency Management Office had 10 action teams under its jurisdiction. With Shangjing as the center, they were responsible for combating all martial artist-related criminal activities in North China. This time, the reason why she came to Spring City was because of the special mission. It was a group of martial artists who illegally came from Nanyang. They planned a shocking kidnapping in Zhonghai, which shocked the entire international Wu Lian. Their timing was very clever. After most of the people in the Zhonghai branch were transferred to Jinling for another mission, they began the operation and directly kidnapped 2 well-known business moguls in Zhonghai. The social impact of this operation was too great. The Zhonghai branch did not have enough time to transfer people from Jinling, so they had to send an emergency request to the headquarters. After the headquarters in Shangjing received the request, they immediately sent out reinforcements. Qin Shuiqing was one of the main people in charge of this rescue mission. After they set off from Shangjing and arrived in Zhonghai, they found that the group of Nanyang people had already gone deep into the hinterland of Huaxia. This group of people was also very brave. After they knew that the military would take over the sea and the air defense, they simply chose to travel by land. They crossed East China, Central China, and South China, planning to return to Nanyang from Guizhou. They had hostages in their hands. All of them were highly skilled in martial arts and were armed with heavy weapons. Due to various considerations, the local police did not dare to obstruct them. They set up checkpoints along the way, but they let them pass. From East China to the border of South China, it was more than 2,000 kilometers. This group of people only took 1 day and 1 night to complete the entire journey. This could already be considered a terrorist activity. In a fit of anger, the Wu Lian leader ordered the action team to set up layers of defense on the border of Guizhou with the Border Defense Army. Even if the hostages were hurt, it was absolutely impossible to let them leave Huaxia unscathed. Qin Shuiqing led the team to intercept them in Guizhou. After a short exchange with that group of people, they retreated after 1 strike and turned to jump into Shirwan Mountains. Shirwan Mountains was located in the southern part of Guizhou. It faced the sea and was adjacent to Yue Bay. The mountains were filled with towering trees, and there were few roads and few people. Qin Shueqing originally thought that they would find an opportunity to cross the border from Shirwan Mountains and escape to Yue Bay, so she launched a search operation in Shirwan Mountains. She did not know that this group of people did not intend to leave through Shirwan Mountains at all. Instead, they turned again and went directly to Dianzhou. With the obstruction of Shirwan Mountains, they successfully shook off the border defense army. However, the weakest under Qin Shueqing's command was at the middle stage of concealing strength. How could she let them escape under her nose? Therefore, she immediately followed them and chased them all the way. Finally, on the border of Dianzhou, Qin Shueqing stopped this group of people again. This time, the other party finally started a direct confrontation with them. Qin Shueqing did not dare to use heavy weapons, but the other party was not polite at all. They carried rocket launchers on their shoulders and only fired them in places where there were many people. They seemed to be escaping from the beginning to the end, but in fact, all of the Wu Lian's actions were within the expectations of this group of people. Their destination was Dianzhou. After Qin Shueqing was injured, the emergency department suddenly lost its backbone. Without the obstruction of the martial arts masters, this group of people rushed across the border. Chapter 152. The atmosphere outside the ward was a little awkward. Lao San leaned against the wall and squatted on the ground. No one knew what he was thinking about. The others were curiously sizing up Chen Shi. Qin Shueqing had already woken up. It was not hard to tell from her reaction that this man was indeed related to her, so they could not be rude to him. Moreover, they dared not be rude to an Alcade Grandmaster. These people all had the usual arrogance of a martial artist. Perhaps it was because they rarely interacted with others, so although they felt a little awkward, none of them thought of standing up to talk to Chen Shi to ease the atmosphere a little. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not stay any longer. He turned and walked toward the elevator. Chen Shi didn't stop until she reached the corridor window directly across from the elevator. The sun was shining brightly outside the window. Even though he was a few streets away, he could still vaguely see the sparkling Dianqi Lake. Spring City was a second-tier city. In order to proactively develop, various policies had been tilted and construction sites were everywhere in the city. The city sped up its development, but it also lost some of its inexplicable charm. Qin Shueqing moved quickly. In less than 2 minutes, she had changed and walked out. Qin Shueqing was dressed casually. She wore a white knitted sweater under a brown windbreaker and a pair of light blue slim-fit jeans that showed off her perfect legs. She did not wear high heels. Instead, she wore a pair of white sneakers. Therefore, she looked like a little girl who had just graduated from university. When they saw Qin Shueqing walk out of the ward, they quickly surrounded her. "Section Chief, where are you going?" Hearing this, Qin Shueqing forced a smile and told them, "Wait for me here. I'll be back soon." "No, the doctor said that you need to rest more, that's right. You've just recovered from a serious illness. You should rest more." "Why are you going out?" "To buy things. Then we can run errands. Since we've already failed the quest, why don't we just relax in Spring City? The environment here is great, and it'll be good for your recovery." Although they were older than Qin Shueqing, they seemed to respect her as their leader. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing could only frown slightly, and then put on his official airs. "All right, you guys wait for me here. I'm going out with my brother-in-law. If the leader asks about me, just tell him that I'm still unconscious, that's all. I'll be back soon." After that, Qin Shueqing turned around and walked towards Chen Shi. Since the leader had spoken, the few of them had no choice but to shut their mouths. So, they just foolishly watched her walk into the elevator with Chen Shi. In the elevator, Qin Shueqing briefly explained the situation to Chen Shi. After hearing this, Chen Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Zhonghai Tycoon? Nanyang people? The two unlucky hostages were obviously Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei. Chen Shi really didn't expect that the whole thing was caused by him. But the strange thing was that he had already asked Ning Qiudong to get the medicine to ransom them. But looking at the situation in front of him, the group of Nanyang people probably went back on their word and wanted to kidnap Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei back to Nanyang. That was why the Wu Lian chased after them. Qin Shueqing was a little absent-minded. After the elevator door opened, she followed Chen Shi directly into the elevator. However, it wasn't until she walked out of the elevator that she realized, Chen Shi didn't press the button for the first floor, but the top floor. The top floor was the ICU ward. There weren't many patients or family members walking around here, so it was very quiet. "Why did you bring me here?" Chen Shi smiled and didn't say anything. After walking out of the elevator, he walked directly to the fire escape next to him, then followed the fire escape to the iron door on the rooftop. He gently touched it with his hand, and the iron door opened. Qin Shueqing was a little confused. But when she saw Chen Shi's mysterious look, she was a little angry. So, she didn't bother to ask any more questions. She directly followed Chen Shi to the rooftop. There was nothing special on the rooftop, only a row of central air conditioning systems. Qin Shueqing looked around, then frowned and asked, "What are you going to do?" Chen Shi stopped in his tracks. He turned around and glanced at Qin Shueqing, then said with a smile, "I'm going to take you flying." "What?" "I said, I'm going to take you flying." After saying that, Chen Shi directly stood on Qin Shueqing's right side, then gently put his hand on her waist. Qin Shueqing was stunned. When she came back to her senses, she wanted to scold Chen Shi. But Chen Shi had already taken her to the sky. The hospital below was getting smaller and smaller. In the blink of an eye, it had completely disappeared. The entire Spring City had shrunk to the size of a palm. Where are those people? Qin Shueqing was a little confused. After hearing Chen Shi's question, she turned to look at Chen Shi in a daze. She had already seen how powerful her cheap brother-in-law was when she was in the village. But when she was really taken flying by Chen Shi, she still couldn't accept it. It was too shocking. There was no sense of weightlessness, and there was no sound of wind. This was because Chen Shi had wrapped her up with her true essence. Qin Shueqing was now considered an immortal cultivator, so she was very sensitive to the fluctuations of vital essence. Therefore, her current feelings were. Her whole body was wrapped in a velvet quilt. It was very comfortable and warm. She couldn't wait to sleep here. Because they didn't have a flying Dharma treasure, Chen Shi didn't want to take advantage of his sister-in-law, so he didn't directly carry her and fly. Instead, he chose an extremely clumsy method. And that was to directly inject his vital essence into Qin Shueqing's body. His sister-in-law was now considered an immortal cultivator, so after Chen Shi's vital essence entered her body, he could circulate the Dharma art without any hindrance. It seemed like he was flying with Qin Shueqing, but in fact, the two of them were flying separately. However, Qin Shueqing didn't know this. Feeling the constant warmth from Chen Shi's hand, she actually blushed for the first time. Because she was worried that Chen Shi would notice her strange behavior, Qin Shueqing quickly turned her head to look in another direction. She didn't even hear Chen Shi talking to her. "I'm asking you a question. Where are those people?" Chen Shi thought she was frightened, so he patiently asked twice. It wasn't until the third time that Qin Shueqing finally came back to her senses. She quickly answered, "Southwest, south of one mountain. It's about 180 kilometers away from Spring City, okay." Chen Shi looked in the direction. After confirming that it was correct, he directly flew over with Qin Shueqing. Qin Shueqing secretly glanced at Chen Shi's side profile from the corner of her eye. Chapter 153. Wenshan County in Dianzhou was a very strange place. It was adjacent to North Vietnam, and the border smuggling industry had even formed a complete industrial chain. Each smuggler was 50 yuan, and the guide fee was 100 yuan. If they needed to apply for a visa, it was 200 yuan. Of course, this was without bargaining. After the smugglers paid the protection fee, they could even seek the protection of the local gangsters. If anything happened, they would come forward to solve it because the other party also had to build a brand reputation. Today, everything in Wenshan was in order. Therefore, many people didn't know what had happened here. More than 20 years ago, a major incident happened in Wenshan County's Pingyuan town. It could be said to be the largest anti-drug operation since the founding of the country. Compared to this incident, the incident in Yuezhou's Lufengboshi village paled in comparison. As for people like Dongbei's fourth master Qiao, Liaodong's Lu Yong, Shanqing's Wen Chang, and Chengdu's Lu Han, they couldn't be compared at all. The former was a gangster who could show off with a pistol, while the latter was a drug lord who had his head tied to his belt and could explode with a grenade at any time. After the anti-drug operation in Pingyuan, Wenshan became what it was today. However, it had always been the focus of the country's attention. The drug dealers weren't stupid. After the anti-drug operation ended, they had already moved to Maoping village, which was more than 100 kilometers south of Wenshan and only 2 kilometers away from the border. They usually lived in Maoping, and when they needed to work, they would smuggle to North Vietnam. They were born and raised in the local area. Every forest and every hillside couldn't be more familiar. This section of the border had no natural barriers. As long as they passed the boundary marker, they would be considered to have left the country. The border guards were also people. If they hadn't received the news in advance or happened to run into them, there was basically no way to stop these people. After leaving the country, they had no right to catch them. After returning to the country, they immediately became honest citizens. They also had no right to catch them. Qin Shueching was ambushed about 2 to 3 kilometers west of Maoping village. After the Wu Lian's investigation, they had already determined that the spy for the Nanyang people was an old drug dealer in Maoping village, Poison Dog. Poison Dog was his nickname more than 20 years ago. After Pingyuan was swept away, Poison Dog changed his name to Old Dog and hid in Maoping village. He was the type of person who didn't have much courage and was usually very cautious. He knew that he was in the business of killing people, so he never hid or transported the drugs himself. He had always let his subordinates do it. Although his reputation was great, his business was very small, and his path was very stable. Where are those Nanyang people? Old Dog's expression was uncertain. After hesitating for a while, he gritted his teeth and said, North Vietnam, Shan Luo. There were 2 kinds of people that Chen Shi had to kill. One was human traffickers, and the other was drug traffickers. The former was inhumane, while the latter was inhumane. However, they needed a guide, so they could only let him live for now. Qin Shueching turned around and looked at Chen Shi. After seeing Chen Shi nod slightly, she said to Old Dog, "Get up and lead the way." Old Dog was shocked when he heard that. He said, "You're going to North Vietnam? Illegally? Stop pretending. Do you think I won't kill you right now?" "Don't, I'll take you." Old Dog was very tactful. After all, it was his instinct to take advantage of the situation. Shan Luo was a province in the northwest of North Vietnam. It shared a border with Laos. Although it was a province, its size was equivalent to that of a county in Hoa Xia. North Vietnam was poor, but Shan Luo was the poorest province in North Vietnam. There was basically no industry here, and agriculture was Shan Luo's economic lifeline. Because of this poverty, poppies had become a traditional local plant. Although the North Vietnam government had been cracking down on the drug trade, it was difficult to manage such a remote mountainous area, so they could only turn a blind eye. After crossing the border, Old Dog found an off-road vehicle and drove the 2 of them straight to Shan Luo. The so-called Nanyang referred to the entire Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Indonesia, and other regions. Those Nanyang people did not belong to the same country, so they should be some kind of organization. Qin Shueching asked Old Dog on the way, but Old Dog insisted that he did not know. From the looks of it, he seemed to be very afraid of something. It was only 100 kilometers from Maoping village to Shan Luo. Old Dog often came here to buy goods, so he was familiar with the road. When the car drove into a small village, Old Dog stopped and pointed at a temple in front of them. He said, "It's there, a temple?" Qin Shueching looked at the believers coming and going at the entrance of the temple. She could not help but look at Old Dog in surprise. Seeing this, Old Dog immediately explained with a bitter face, "The temple is just a cover. The biggest drug market in North Vietnam is inside. Leader, I'll be your informant. Don't expose me, or else I'll be dead." "Okay, then wait for us here." Qin Shueching got out of the off-road vehicle in high spirits, then walked directly to the temple in front of them. Perhaps it was because Qin Shi was next to her, so when Qin Shueching walked to the temple, she was not worried at all. Instead, she felt a little excited. It was a feeling that Qin Wanqing had never experienced before, that she had someone backing her up. It was very exciting, however. She did not notice it at all. She was like a child who was bullied outside, and now she came back with her parents to get back at them. Chapter 154. Nanyang did not seem big, but it was one of the more densely populated areas in the world. There were many immigrants here, and because it was once a colony, the locals had many different beliefs, such as Buddhism, Catholicism, Christianity, and Judaism. Among them, most of them believed in Buddhism. Unlike Huaxia's Mahayana Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism was more popular in Nanyang. The difference between the two was that Mahayana Buddhism promoted the salvation of others and oneself, while Hinayana Buddhism promoted self-indulgence. If one had to describe it, one could say that one was a bus, while the other was a motorcycle. Hinayana Buddhism was a derogatory term for Mahayana Buddhism. In fact, Hinayana Buddhism's followers did not agree with this term. They called themselves Southern Theravada Buddhism. The Nanyang region mainly believed in Hinayana Buddhism, so the temples were very different from those in Huaxia. Huaxia's temples were mostly palatial, majestic, and solemn. Nanyang's temples, on the other hand, were mostly stand-alone. They were relatively small, with a Buddhist hall and a Buddhist pagoda, surrounded by scattered monks' residences or places for rest and study. Mahayana Buddhism's temples had many statues of Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and all kinds of protectors. However, Hinayana Buddhism's temples only had one statue. Shanlua was too poor, so most of the villagers here wore coarse linen clothes. Therefore, when a young woman like Qin Shueching appeared in a trench coat and jeans, she immediately attracted a lot of attention. Nanyang was tropical and had a tropical monsoon climate. Most of the people here had light brown, or even dark brown skin. Qin Shueching's skin was fair and beautiful. Compared to them, she immediately looked like a fairy who had descended from the heavens. After hearing Old Dog say that this was where the Nanyang people were hiding, Qin Shueching immediately walked towards the temple. Her sister-in-law seemed to have a bad temper and was not easy to get along with, but in fact, she had never even killed a chicken before. Although she had a license to kill, she had always controlled herself when she was on missions. Once the enemy lost the ability to resist, she would immediately stop. However, being friendly to others did not mean that others would be friendly to her. That shot had completely angered Qin Shueching. As a result, her wound had not even healed, and she was still in an extremely weak state. When she heard that Qin Shi was going to avenge her, she immediately followed him. If she was not as skilled as him, it would be fine. However, the other party arranged for a sniper to ambush and almost take her life. Although her life was saved, her right hand. So she had to take revenge. After seeing Qin Wanqing get out of the car and leave, Qin Shi also opened the door for her. Before leaving, Qin Shi smiled and said to the Old Dog, "Let me give you a piece of advice. You better stay here and wait for us to come back." Then, he followed Qin Shueching. After the two of them left, the Old Dog spat out the window, hesitating whether to drive away now. However, of course of the world's Qin. This young man was not simple. Even if he ran away now, he could only run away as a monk, but not as a temple. Unless he never returned to Huaxia. His wife and children were still in Huaxia. How could he not go back? This was indeed a temple. It looked a little ordinary. After entering the main hall, the first thing that came into view was a golden statue of Buddha. A monk was meditating by the side. When he saw Qin Shueqing, he said a few words. Qin Shueqing did not understand. She frowned and tried to say, "I'm looking for someone." The monk was stunned. Then he said in awkward Chinese, "Who are you looking for?" Qin Shueqing was about to speak. But at this moment, she saw a figure walking out from behind the Buddha statue. It was a dark and thin man. He was about 30 years old. His skin was dark, and he wore a coarse short coat. The muscles on his arms were exposed. Qin Shueqing was indeed too eye-catching. So the dark and thin man saw her at first sight. The dark and thin man was stunned for a moment. Then he reached for his waist. "I'm looking for him." The moment she saw the dark skinny man, Qin Wanqing's expression couldn't help but turn cold. After saying that, she seemed to have turned into a white crane and flew toward the man in an instant. The dark skinny man's reaction was also very fast. Just as Qin Wanqing pounced on him, he had already taken out a pistol from his waist. Who knew how much blood these people had on their hands, so they didn't hesitate at all when they fired. He aimed the gun at Qin Shueqing and wanted to pull the trigger. However, after he pulled the trigger with his index finger, the trigger did not move. It was as if it was stuck. Because this time, her brother-in-law was standing behind her sister-in-law. After all, she had just recovered from a serious injury. Her skills were not as good as before. What if she was not careful and got shot again? The dark and thin man reacted quickly. When he saw that the trigger could not be pulled, he turned around and wanted to run. But at this time, Qin Shueqing had already rushed in front of him. She raised her left hand and grabbed his neck. Then she pressed him against the wall. Because she used too much force, the dark and thin man's eyes rolled back. With Qin Shueqing's character and habits, it was absolutely impossible for her to have any close contact with such a rough and stinky man. But now she was angry, so she did not care about anything. She grabbed the dark and thin man by the neck and lifted him up. Then she asked coldly, "Where is the Huaxia that you kidnapped?" All of this happened in the blink of an eye. The monk next to them was an ordinary person. After being stunned for a moment, the monk was frightened by the scene in front of him. He ran toward the back of the temple. She looked at the back of the monk and did not choose to stop him. Instead, he went behind Qin Shueqing and asked casually, "Are you sure that he can understand Chinese?" Qin Shueqing could not help but be angry when she heard this. She was completely angry now, so she did not care about anything else. Her left hand tightened again, and the dark and thin man immediately rolled his eyes. "Speak. Where is the Huaxia that you kidnapped?" "That's enough. He is about to be strangled to death." She was speechless. He patted her shoulder. Then, she walked to the dark skinny man's side and took the gun from his hand. Bang! 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 The crisp sound of a gunshot rang out in the main hall, startling a flock of birds. The peace of the small village was broken by the sudden gunshot. The moment the villagers heard the gunshot, they all ran back to their homes. In a short while, there was not a single person on the dirt road in the village. "What are you doing?" After the gunshot rang out, Qin Shueqing immediately let go of her hand. The dark and thin man fell to the ground and wailed in pain. She fired 3 shots. One was aimed at the sky, while the other 2 were aimed at the dark and thin man's thighs. She looked at Shi in surprise. Shi smiled and played with the gun in his hand. This was an M1911 .45 caliber. There were many scratches on the gun, and it looked a little old. It was probably an antique left behind from the Vietnam War. Her sister-in-law was a civil servant, so no matter how angry she was still bound by the rules of a civil servant. Therefore, when Qin fired the gun, her sister-in-law seemed to be unable to accept it. That was because she had not changed her mind. This was not Huaxia. The person in front of her was not a kind person. This was a drug lord, a level higher than a drug dealer. Drug dealers could also be forced to take the risk to engage in this line of work. However, drug lords were the source of all evil. For the sake of profit, they had sold their souls to the devil. Qin Shueqing instinctively wanted to be merciful. However, she had never thought about what kind of experience it would be if she fell into their hands. The drug production in Nanyang accounted for almost 70% of the world's drug production. Thinking about those anti-narcotics police officers who died in the battle, it would not be enough to drag this group of crazy drug lords out and shoot them 10,000 times. Talking about humanity with them? First of all, they had to have humanity. Qin handed the gun to Qin Shueqing, then patted her shoulder as encouragement. Okay, you're here to find trouble, not to drink and chat with them. Instead of letting you find them, let them find you. Chapter 155. Play the arrow with full health, then fight the boss with low health. First, the small ones, then the big ones, and finally the boss. That was a scene only seen in movies and TV shows. Instead of fighting the small monsters all the way, Qin preferred to ask, who else? Qin Shueqing seemed to be in a daze. Qin smiled and did not explain further. After about a minute, there was a rush of footsteps from the back of the hall. The two turned around and saw a group of Nanyang people with various weapons suddenly rushing into the hall. There were at least 15 or 16 people in front of them. Most of the people here could be said to be short and vigorous. Some were holding pistols, some were holding submachine guns, and some were even holding AK-47s. There were 2 old pagoda trees in front of the temple. They were estimated to have lived for hundreds of years. The lush leaves blocked most of the sunlight and made the hall look a little dim. There were 3 categories of countries in the world: developed countries, developing China, and least developed countries. Vietnam was originally at the bottom of the list, but the economic situation had improved significantly in recent years, so it jumped from the least developed country to developing China. Although it became developing China, there was a clear difference between Vietnam and Huaxia. Vietnam today was equivalent to Huaxia in the 80s and 90s. It was a critical time to go from chaos to order. Vietnam banned guns, but because there was a long anti-colonial struggle in this place, there were a lot of weapons. Although the Vietnam government tried to confiscate them, the effect was limited. Most of the guns smuggled in Huaxia came from this place. Since they were smuggling arms, it was easy to guess the firearms in the hands of the drug lords. The existence of drug lords, who were anti-human, was a cancer to society. It was not that Qin was exaggerating, but if he pulled out all of these people and shot them, it was impossible to kill by mistake. Qin's marksmanship was very good, and the previous 2 shots were penetrating wounds. The bullets did not hit the bone or artery, but went directly through the thigh. Penetrating wounds were easy to treat, but the prerequisite was that the bleeding had to be stopped in time. Otherwise, excessive blood loss would lead to shock or even death. The group of people swarmed into the hall like a swarm of bees. After glancing at their companions who were still wailing on the ground, they all pointed their guns at Qin and Qin Shueqing. However, what made Qin a little surprised was that among this group of Nanyang people, there was clearly a foreigner with a different style: Chinese. Chinese and Nanyang people still had obvious differences in appearance, so they could be distinguished at a glance. The Chinese man didn't carry any weapons, but from his position, it wasn't hard to tell that he held a high position among the Nanyang people. "What are you 2 doing here?" He looked to be in his 30s. His skin was yellowish, but he did not have the tan that was commonly seen on Nanyang people. His companion on the ground was still wailing and bleeding, but he chose to ignore it. Instead, he looked at Qin Shueqing with interest. 2 long legs stretched tight by a pair of slim jeans, a perky chest under a white knitted sweater, fair and tender skin, and exquisite facial features that seemed to be made by nature. They were used to seeing rural women in the small valleys of Nanyang. Suddenly, such a stunning beauty popped up. These people really wanted to stare their eyes out. Qin Shueqing had never been pointed at by so many people in her life, so she subconsciously frowned. No matter how powerful a martial arts master was, he was still immortal. No matter how fast he was, he couldn't outrun bullets. No matter how strong his muscles were, he couldn't withstand a round of bullets. She had always been the one leading people with guns. Now that her position had changed, she was really not used to it. Was she afraid? She wasn't afraid that it was fake. However, when she thought of her cheap brother-in-law behind her, Qin Shueqing suddenly became very confident. International Wu Lian Headquarters Emergency Management Office in Beijing. We're here today to look for 2 kidnapped Huaxia people. We hope that you will cooperate with the investigation. The Chinese man was stunned for a moment. Then, he used Nanyang language to translate Qin Shueqing's words. Just as he finished translating, his companions beside him started laughing out loud. This Chinese man was Bai Rongcheng. His grandfather immigrated to Nanyang and his family never left. There were many Chinese in Nanyang. They were the largest group of Chinese overseas and were also the most economically successful group. If the Jews controlled the economy of the United States, then the Chinese in Nanyang controlled the entire economy of Nanyang. Of course, this was a slightly exaggerated statement, but it was very intuitive. The Chinese in Nanyang were intelligent, hardworking, and thrifty. After they established themselves in Nanyang, they immediately worked hard to improve their social status. Bai Rongcheng's father was not satisfied with the status quo, so he started the drug business. They could be considered drug lords, but they could also be considered not. Because they were just middlemen who were responsible for pulling strings. For example, after a boss of a gang in Hong Kong was killed or arrested, the first thing the new boss would do was to visit the middleman in Nanyang. Production and sales were important links that could not be separated. The big drug lords were closely watched by Interpol and generally did not leave their territory easily. At this time, the middlemen needed to step in. In recent years, many countries around the world had increased their efforts to crack down on drug trafficking, but the global drug trade did not decrease. Instead, it increased by more and more. Why? It was all because of the middlemen. They could be said to be omnipresent middlemen. Money or guns? Choose one. Either cooperate or your whole family dies. The group of people led by Bai Rongcheng spoke in English. Qin Shueqing could not understand. However, how could she not understand their wretched expressions and obscene actions? Her sister-in-law was so angry that her face turned red. However, the black barrel in front of her made her quite wary. Seeing this, She took a step forward. The hall was filled with laughter, and the atmosphere seemed relaxed. However, in reality, the two sides were at daggers drawn. After she took a step forward, Bai Rongcheng's face suddenly froze. His companions next to him also pointed their guns at Shi. Then, Shi suddenly opened his arms. Then, he leaned forward slightly and pressed both of his arms forward. The true essence around his body suddenly erupted like a tsunami, surging and surging violently. There was no sound, only a series of exclamations. This group of armed thugs was like a bowling ball that had been knocked over. They were instantly thrown off their feet. However, their reaction was also extremely fast. Although they were dizzy and their blood was surging. After this group of thugs fell to the ground, their first reaction was not to get up, but to lie on the ground, raise their guns, and pull the trigger. Da-da-da, there was a series of fierce gunshots in the hall. The bullets swept the wooden door, and suddenly a cloud of wood chips exploded. Old Dog was sitting in the off-road vehicle. He could hear the fierce gunshots coming from the temple from afar. With his experience, he could even tell which model the gunshots belonged to. Sigh, they're asking for it. After sighing pretentiously, Old Dog leisurely lit a cigarette, intending to finish it before setting off. The gunshots sounded for about half a minute. Then, the gunshots stopped abruptly. In the temple, Bai Rongcheng sat on the ground, looking at everything in front of him in a daze. The originally solemn Buddhist hall had been dyed a different shade of crimson by the fresh blood. The wooden floor was also covered in blood. Other than the blood stains on the walls and doorposts, there was also some minced meat stuck to them. The minced meat and fresh blood mixed together, constantly emitting a strong fishy smell. This purgatory-like scene made Qin Shuiqing very uncomfortable. She quickly covered her mouth and ran out of the temple. The blood had already dyed Bai Rongqing red, but there was not a single wound on his body. What happened just now? Bai Rongqing's mind was a mess. Blood flowed down from the corner of his eyes, and his ears were buzzing. He only remembered, the young man in front of him suddenly waved his arms. Then, his men opened fire. But the target of their shots, it was not the young man in front of him, but the teammates next to him. More than 10 people suddenly picked up guns and shot at each other, resulting in this scene of purgatory on Earth. Qin Shi calmly looked at Bai Rongqing and suddenly asked, "Can we have a good chat now?" After hearing his voice, Bai Rongqing could not help but tremble. Chapter 156. Nanyang was different from Huaxia. Huaxia's mysterious power came from the necromancers, and it had a bit of the style of an immortal. The necromancers were righteous, and Nanyang was evil. Nanyang was tropical, with lush vegetation, poisonous snakes, and insects. After animals died, they were prone to rot and maggots. But it was such a sunny place that gave birth to the 3 most evil sorcery in the world: voodoo, black magic, and black magic. Every one of them was filthy and evil. Zhang Jiada's youngest son, Zhang Hongyuan, learned black magic in Nanyang, and then used it on his father, causing his father to suffer from illness and pain. Bai Rongqing had seen these mysterious powers. But no matter how powerful the voodoo was, it was impossible to instantly control people's minds and make them kill each other. Although he had participated in warlord wars and was used to the battlefield where limbs were flying everywhere, Bai Rongqing was just an ordinary person after all. So when he saw the scene in front of him, he was immediately scared out of his wits. More than a dozen brothers who spent time with him suddenly pulled out guns and fought, and died tragically around him. Such a strange scene could only be described with the word ghost. Looking at Bai Rongqing's sorry state, Qin Shi couldn't help but glance at him with some disgust, then frowned and asked, "Tell me, where are the 2 Huaxia people? Who is the mastermind behind their kidnapping?" Bai Rongqing was stunned for a moment, then immediately shouted in panic, "Meiman. It has nothing to do with me. Ba Cha, it was Ba Cha who did it." "What do you mean? Speak clearly." His tone was very panicked, and his Mandarin was not very standard, so Qin Shi didn't understand for a while. "I was only responsible for providing support. It was Ba Cha who ordered it. He's in Meiman. Those 2 Huaxia people have been brought back to Meiman by him." This time, Qin Shi finally understood. Meiman should be a place. Ba Cha was the mastermind of this series of events. Since he was in charge of providing support, the person who arranged for the sniper was definitely the one in front of him. Thinking of this, Qin Shi turned his head to look outside the hall, but Qin Shuiqing had long since disappeared. It was probably because he had never seen such a bloody scene before, so he felt a little nauseous. "Forget it, remember to be a good person in your next life and accumulate more good karma." Hearing this, Bai Rongqing's expression suddenly changed. He thought that Qin Shi was going to kill him, so he quickly knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing, begging for mercy, "Don't kill me. None of my business. I am also from Huaxia. Don't kill me." Qin Shi didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, she turned around and walked out of the hall. Looking at his back as he left, Bai Rongqing thought that his begging had worked, so he was so excited that he wanted to stand up. However, at this moment, Qin Shi, who had already walked out of the hall, suddenly snapped his fingers. A flame suddenly jumped out from his fingertips. Then, the flame was like a dandelion, slowly floating on top of the blood in the hall. Like a spark on oil, the blood on the ground did not seem to be blood, but gasoline. The raging fire engulfed Bai Rongqing in an instant. Outside the hall, when Old Dog saw Qin Shueqing walk out of the hall safe and sound, he could not help but widen his eyes. When he saw Qin Shi walk out of the hall, his face suddenly looked as if he had seen a ghost. The gunshots were so intense just now, could it be that they were shooting? Qin Shi waved in Old Dog's direction, and Old Dog immediately started the car and anxiously drove in front of the two of them. While the two of them were in the car, Old Dog secretly glanced at the hall, then, he could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and cold sweat appeared on his face. Go to Mayman. Ah. Old Dog had not recovered from the shock, and when he heard Qin Shi say it again, he said with a panicked expression, Mayman? Golden Triangle? Hearing this, Qin Shi raised his eyebrows and could not help but chuckle. Golden Triangle? Let's go, let's take a look. It had to be said that the Old Dog was also very powerful. After entering Laos, he contacted a helicopter and directly flew Qin Shi and Qin Shueqing to the Golden Triangle. This place was inaccessible and mountainous. Most of the areas were more than 3,000 meters above sea level, and the roads were all small roads, so they had to rely on horses and mules to transport drugs. Now that they had money, helicopters naturally became the most popular item for drug traffickers. 20 years ago, Kun Sa ruled the world here, but after Kun Sa's death, this place returned to its previous state of fragmentation, similar to the three kingdoms of Qin and Han. Bacha is a drug trafficker who suddenly rose to prominence in the past 10 years, and his group of people are not afraid to fight. In terms of strength, he is below average, but in terms of terror, he is definitely in the top 3. At this rate, I think he will become the second Kun Sa. Seeing that Bai Rongqing was easily taken care of by them, Old Dog was finally willing to open his mouth. Whatever Qin Shi asked, he answered honestly, and did not dare to be hazy at all. After flying for almost 40 minutes, a small village appeared in Qin Shi's field of vision. This was a very backward village, and the style of the houses were all wooden high houses unique to Nanyang. A few children ran around the village from time to time, and it was a peaceful scene. The helicopter landed in the open space outside the village, but the children seemed to be used to it, and did not even gather around to look at it. Qin Shueqing got off the helicopter and saw a sea of red flowers. It was a sea of poppies, and they were as red as blood. Chapter 157. This was a place where poppies bloomed, and where drugs were rampant and evil were bred. In people's impression, this place represented darkness. However, after experiencing it for themselves, people realized that this place was so beautiful and sunny. If they didn't know that they were poppies, they would only think that it was a sea of flowers more beautiful than roses, delicate and dazzling. The tropical monsoon climate made the vegetation and trees here particularly lush. The entire mountain was basically covered with green shade, and it was a beautiful scenery that belonged to nature. Even the spirit of heaven and earth was far better than the Qinling Mountains, and this place was actually a paradise. Just from looking at the scenery, it seemed that this place was completely unrelated to darkness, drugs, and murder. It was 3:30 in the afternoon in Shangjing, and the sun was particularly bright in Mayman. The sentry post was a wooden tower that was about 4 meters tall. On the left and right, there was a Nanyang soldier with a gun on guard. It was not right to say that they were soldiers, because they were actually a group of militiamen who had not undergone military training. The fierceness in their bones was enough to run rampant. The two militiamen lazily leaned on the sentry post's railing. At this time, there was suddenly a faint sound of horse hooves in front of them. When the two horses were only about 30 meters away from the sentry post, the sentries suddenly came back to their senses. After greeting each other, they leaned out. There were 2 horses, with a man and a woman sitting on each of them. Looking at the bright clothes and fashionable clothes, it was as if they were tourists who had mistakenly entered this place. But this was the core area of the Golden Triangle. How could there be tourists? The sentry on the left was rather alert and immediately aimed his gun at the 2 of them. Then, he started mumbling something that no one knew what to say. Perhaps seeing that they had no weapons on them, the two-sentry did not immediately shoot. The horse went straight to the wooden door in the middle of the two sentry posts. At this time, the sentry finally saw the appearance of the two people. Beauty knew no boundaries. After seeing the woman's appearance, one of the sentries couldn't help but whistle. Then, he stuck his head out and mumbled something that no one knew what he was talking about. Qin Shueqing glanced at Qin Shi and suddenly asked, "You left, I right?" "Up to you." "All right." As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Shueqing suddenly jumped up from the back of the horse. She jumped 3 or 4 meters high. Like a swallow returning to its nest, she leaped into the sentry's basket. The one on the left should be a veteran, so when he saw Qin Shueqing suddenly jump from the back of the horse, he immediately reacted and quickly pointed his gun at Qin Shueqing. In the past, if they did not work for drug lords, they would have their hands and feet chopped off or even their lives. Times had changed. Now, drug lords would give generous wages, so more and more flower farmers were attracted to work for them. In the off-season, flower farmers could even go down the mountain to the city to buy. For flower farmers, this was just a job to support their families. Qin Shueqing was a little surprised by the lax security here. Except for the two sentry posts, there was not a single soldier in sight. She did not know that now was not 20 years ago. The weapons and equipment of drug lords had been upgraded long ago. The rich ones even rented satellites to keep an eye on the troop movements of the surrounding countries. Even without satellites, radar was a necessary item. So the function of the sentry post was more like announcing the ownership of this territory to the outside world. Most people would not go to the nest of drug lords for no reason. After all, trespassing into a military base would at most be expelled, but trespassing into a drug lord's territory would cost one's life. Meimen was like a small town. There were several villages around the town, and the villages were surrounded by a sea of flowers. The two walked for a while. After passing through a sea of flowers, the terrain suddenly opened up, and the reinforced concrete building finally appeared in front of them. In front of them was the legendary town of Meimen. Qin Shueqing curiously looked at the layout of the town and found that the place was completely arranged according to the plan of a military base. In the center of the base, there were 2 missile launchers, and several cannons were arranged on the roof next to them. A little further ahead, there was a helipad full of armed helicopters. On the right side of the town, there was a training ground, where hundreds of armed soldiers were being trained. Except for the lack of an airport runway, there was really everything here. This, Qin Shueqing was a little stunned. Because her impression of drug lords was still in the movies. However, what she did not know was that the movies were all about the drug lords of Kun Sa's time. Decades had passed, and even Hua Xia's aircraft carrier had been launched. If the drug lords had not been upgraded, they would have been wiped out by the government long ago. How about, we go back and think about it? It was true that her sister-in-law was arrogant, but she was definitely not stupid. No wonder the government had not shouted the slogan of encirclement and suppression of the Golden Triangle in recent years. It was because the fight would be terrible. In the past, the soldiers rushed with guns. 2 heavy machine guns could kill a regiment, and they could not take a step forward. Chapter 158. Looking at the modern military base in front of her, Qin Shueqing had some thoughts of retreating. But when Qin Shi heard her words, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He first glanced at Qin Shueqing's right arm, then asked with a faint smile, "Do you still remember why you're here?" Qin Shueqing was stunned. After looking down at her right arm unnaturally, she said hesitantly, "Are you really that confident?" "I'm above the heavens." When he said this, Qin Shueqing couldn't help but look at Qin Shi. Her almond-shaped eyes widened, as if she was very surprised. Seeing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but ask, "What? Is it strange?" Qin Shueqing realized that she had lost her composure, so she quickly shook her head and sighed, "You should be above the heavens, that's good. Go, I'm in a hurry. I have to go back to Shangjing later." Okay. Perhaps she was infected by Chen Shi's strong confidence. Qin Shueqing nodded heavily and didn't say anything else. She jumped off the horse and walked directly to the base in front of them. Chen Shi rarely rode a horse, so naturally, he wanted to ride to his heart's content. So he leisurely followed behind his sister-in-law to the base. If Nian was here, she would have already clamored to ride a big horse. The base didn't have a wall. It was surrounded by a circle of barbed wire, and the so-called gate was only a railing that could be raised. The strange behavior of the two had already attracted the attention of the sentinels. However, their attire made the sentinels think that they were customers who came to buy drugs, so they didn't suspect anything. Therefore, when Qin Shueqing approached the gate, a soldier came out from the side of the sentry post, and then he started talking. Qin Shueqing didn't look at the soldier. Instead, he looked at an empty space not far behind the soldier. There were a lot of wooden stakes there, and a few of them had people tied to them, just like the crucified Jesus. These people were full of scars, and they hung on the stakes motionlessly. No one knew whether they were dead or alive. She took a closer look, and after confirming that those people were not Hua Xia's people, she could not help but let out a sigh of relief. If the hostages were to die here, the reputation of the Shangjing Emergency Department would be completely lost. Seeing that Qin Shueqing didn't reply, the soldier was a little angry, so he wanted to come up to her and take her back for questioning. Just as he reached out to grab Qin Shueqing's left arm, Qin Shueqing made the first move and directly grabbed the soldier's neck. Gotcha! Qin Shueqing exerted a little force with her slender fingers, and the unlucky guy's neck was broken. She wasn't a helpless flower vase. Even if one of her hands was broken, she was still a great master in the gang state. There was a surveillance room in the base, and there were many monitors in it, monitoring the movements in the surrounding villages. Taking the layout of a regular military base as an example, the outer perimeter was a sentry post, surveillance tower, machine gun tower, concrete walls, and barbed wire. Inside the base was an arsenal, an armory, a fuel depot, and barracks, including dormitories, dining halls, and toilets. The drug lords were not so particular. The anti-aircraft guns were placed at the entrance of the base, and the surface-to-air missile launchers were placed in the middle of the base. What was even more bizarre was that there was actually a villa not far behind the missile launcher. The villa was 2 stories high and there was a small garden in front of it. It was obvious that this was the base of the drug lords. The two of them surrounded the base. Chen Shi held his gun and constantly shot at the fish that tried to escape the net. Whoever dared to show their head, he raised his gun and shot. 30 bullets were quickly used up. When there were no more bullets, he threw down the rifle and shattered the ground with his foot. With a wave of his hand, a series of gravel accurately hit the enemy's forehead. In the beginning, some small shrimps tried to resist by shooting, but as the two of them gradually went deeper, the sound of gunfire gradually subsided. The two of them walked straight to the villa. At this time, Chen Shi discovered a problem. In the beginning, 200 to 300 people died. In addition to the small shrimps that came out one after another, there were at most 400 people. It was impossible for such a large military base to only have so few people. No matter how he thought about it, something felt wrong. Then, where were the people? Chen Shi pondered as he pushed open the door of the villa with Qin Shueqing. This was a magnificent villa. If the floors were a little higher, it could almost be called a castle. The drug lords had no taste and were purely nouveau riche. Therefore, the decoration in the villa was very luxurious. There were all kinds of gorgeous and luxurious furnishings that could be considered dazzling. Among them, the most eye-catching was the bearskin carpet that could be seen as soon as they walked in. The villa was empty. There was no one in sight. The two of them looked at each other. When Chen Shi was about to say something, a child suddenly appeared on the stairs on the second floor. It was a Nanyang child who looked to be only 12 or 13 years old. His face was full of fear and timidity. In sharp contrast, the AK-74 in his arms was the stark contrast. As the most widely used automatic rifle in the world, the AK-47 was known as the world's king of guns. A total of 100 million units were produced. At least 53 countries purchased and fully equipped it. 5 countries even painted it on their national flags. This was the synonym for slaughter. So far, at least 20 million people had died under the muzzle of the AK-47. It was far more than the number of casualties caused by the 2 atomic bombs in Japan. The black barrel trembled slightly. The child seemed to be very afraid. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing could not help but be stunned. But in the moment when she was distracted, the child suddenly opened fire. Da-da-da, the muzzle of the gun spat out tongues of fire. There was no fear on the child's face. There was only excitement and fanaticism. The recoil of the AK-47 was well known. However, because the child had been practicing for a long time, his hands were very steady. He stood on the stairs on the second floor as if he had gone crazy. He laughed wildly as he sprayed bullets downwards. The bullets swept the table, the windows, the furniture, and instantly tore everything into pieces. The 30 bullets were quickly used up. When the child put down the gun and looked at his masterpiece proudly, he suddenly realized that although it was a mess downstairs, the 2 people stood there without moving at all. After sighing softly, Qin Shi turned his head and said to Qin Shueqing helplessly, "The bullets fired from the gun of a 14-year-old child are as deadly as the bullets fired from the gun of a 40-year-old man, maybe even more deadly." Qin Shueqing heard this sentence before. It was from the King of War. However, when this scene happened in front of her eyes, she couldn't help but feel very complicated. Qin Shi did not say anything else. With a wave of his hand, the bullets that stopped in front of them all turned around and then shot at the child on the stairs at a faster speed. The body was a child, but the heart was a demon, so, can't stay. Originally, Qin Shi came with the mentality of avenging his sister-in-law, but after being disturbed by this child, even he began to feel a little uncomfortable. The child was not wrong. It was the world that was wrong. Even a teenager was trained to be a demon that killed without batting an eyelid. This kind of behavior had completely infuriated him. After frowning and glancing at the stairs, Qin Shi suddenly seemed to have noticed something. He quickly looked back at the door of the villa. Qin Shueqing saw his actions. While she was confused, Qin Shi's figure had already disappeared from the hall. Almost at the same time, he was outside the villa. Chapter 161. The explosion just now caught Qin Shueqing's attention. Although she couldn't fly, her running speed wasn't slow. As soon as Qin Shi walked into the tunnel, she had already rushed over. Martial artists were too weak in the face of modern weapons. It was fine if it was an assassination, but when it came to a large-scale confrontation like this, she could only hide in the back and cheer. After all, she couldn't compare to a non-human existence, right? So even if she didn't want to admit defeat, she could only obediently hide behind Qin Shi and follow her cheap brother-in-law to sweep through everything. The underground base was about the size of 3 or 4 football fields, about the same size as the fake base outside. The height of the entire space was at least 4 or 5 stories high, and it didn't feel oppressive at all. There weren't many people in the fake base because everyone was hiding here. As far as the eye could see, rows of military tents were placed in the open space, and many workers in white coats and masks were constantly coming in and out of the tents. Although there were many ventilation devices, the entire underground space was filled with a sour smell. This was because the purification of drugs required acetic acid. How was this a military base? It was clearly a huge drug manufacturing factory. At the same time, it was also an inexhaustible natural treasury. After Qin Shi killed the soldiers at the end of the tunnel, he stepped into the air and walked directly over the pile of corpses. Qin Shuiqing didn't have his ability, so she could only jump into the open space on the opposite side. Then, they were surrounded. With the two of them as the center, hundreds of fully armed soldiers fanned out and pointed their guns at them. However, this time, the other party seemed to have learned their lesson, so they didn't immediately attack. Qin Shi glanced around. Wherever his gaze landed, the soldiers all retreated in fear. The originally slightly loose encirclement was expanded by his gaze just like that. Only one person didn't move. It was a middle-aged man with dark skin. He looked to be in his 40s and was about 1.8 meters tall. Compared to the Nanyang people around him, his height was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Respected Celestial, greetings. The middle-aged man's Chinese was much more standard than Bai Rongqing's, so Qin Shi immediately frowned and asked, "Are you from Huaxia?" "No, I'm from Shan." "Alright, as long as you're happy." Although he didn't want to admit it, most of the big drug lords in the Golden Triangle who wreaked havoc all over the world were actually Chinese. Even Kun Sa, who had almost unified the Golden Triangle, was from Dianzhou. This middle-aged man was Bacha, the leader of Meimen, a true warlord and drug lord. After hearing Qin Shi's seemingly joking reply, Bacha immediately felt relieved. He quickly turned his head and gestured to the attendant beside him.